The slap came so suddenly that Evelyn Whitmore did not see it coming until her cheek struck the edge of the vanity mirror. Crystal perfume bottles rattled across polished oak. One rolled off the table and shattered against the marble floor. For a moment, the only sound inside the dressing chamber was Evelyn's uneven breathing and the distant music drifting upward from the ballroom below. Lady Margaret Whitmore lowered her hand slowly, as though she had merely corrected a wrinkle in fabric rather than struck her daughter across the face. "Look at you," she said coldly. 23 years old and still incapable of standing properly. Evelyn kept her eyes lowered. A faint sting burned across her cheekbone. She tasted blood at the corner of her mouth but did not lift a hand to wipe it away. Experience had taught her that any visible reaction only prolonged her mother's displeasure. Behind them, two maids stood frozen beside the wardrobe. Neither woman moved. Neither spoke. They had learned the same lesson years ago. Lady Margaret stepped closer and adjusted the neckline of Evelyn's pale blue evening gown with sharp, precise fingers. "If Lord Everleigh notices your nervous habits tonight, this entire evening will be ruined." "Yes, mother," Evelyn replied quietly. "And stop trembling." The command arrived in the same smooth voice Lady Margaret used at charity galas and aristocratic dinners. To the outside world, she was elegance itself. Refined, intelligent, devoted to her daughters. The perfect widow of one of London's most respected families. Only this room ever saw the truth. Lady Margaret's eyes narrowed as she studied Evelyn's reflection in the mirror. "You should be grateful." Evelyn remained silent. Gratitude had always been expected in exchange for survival. "Do you know how many girls would beg for your opportunities?" Her mother continued. "You live in Mayfair. You wear imported silk. You attend the finest social events in England. Yet somehow you always manage to appear pathetic." Evelyn swallowed carefully. "I will do better tonight." "You will do exactly as I say tonight." Lady Margaret reached for Evelyn's chin and tilted her face toward the candlelight. The movement exposed the fading bruise near her wrist where the sleeve had shifted slightly. Her mother's expression hardened instantly. "Cover that." Evelyn pulled the glove higher without argument. Lady Margaret stepped back with visible disgust. "Honestly, sometimes I wonder if your father cursed me before he died." At the mention of him, something deep inside Evelyn tightened painfully. Her father had been gone for nearly 8 years. Long enough for the house to become colder with every passing season. Long enough for fear to settle permanently into the walls of Whitmore Manor. Long enough for Evelyn to forget what it felt like to be spoken to gently inside her own home. The younger maid bent quickly to gather the shattered glass from the floor. Her hands shook badly enough that one sharp fragment nicked her finger. A drop of blood appeared. Lady Margaret noticed immediately. "Clumsy girl." The maid turned pale. "I am sorry, my lady." "Then stop behaving like an idiot." Evelyn glanced toward the frightened servant. She recognized that expression too well. The desperate effort to become invisible. Lady Margaret walked toward the window overlooking the illuminated gardens below. Carriages continued arriving in a steady procession for the Whitmore winter reception. Candlelight flickered across the snow-covered hedges outside. London's elite had gathered downstairs tonight. Lords, ladies, wealthy industrial families desperate for noble connections. The house glowed with music and wealth and polished perfection. No one downstairs would imagine what had happened in this room only moments earlier. "Lord Everleigh's family is facing financial difficulties," Lady Margaret said without turning around. "His mother is eager for a respectable match. You will smile at him this evening." Evelyn stared quietly at her reflection. Her cheek had already begun to redden beneath the powder. "Yes, mother. And if he asks for a dance, you will accept immediately." "Of course. You are not in a position to refuse anyone anymore." The words landed harder than the slap had. Evelyn lowered her gaze before her mother could see the brief flash of hurt in her eyes. Once, years ago, she had still believed marriage might contain affection, kindness, safety. She no longer entertained such fantasies. In her world, marriages were transactions conducted by people with colder hearts and better manners. Lady Margaret finally turned back toward her daughter. "You should remember something, Evelyn." Her voice softened slightly. That softness was always more frightening than anger. "Women like us survive by being useful." Evelyn felt her stomach tighten. "Yes, mother. Beauty fades. Youth fades. Sentiment is worthless. The only thing that matters is whether a woman can secure advantage for her family." She approached again and smoothed a non-existent wrinkle from Evelyn's sleeve. "Tonight you will be useful." A knock interrupted the room before Evelyn could answer. One of the footmen appeared at the doorway and bowed respectfully. "Lady Amelia asked if Miss Evelyn might join the guests downstairs, my lady." For the first time that evening, warmth flickered briefly through Evelyn's chest at the mention of her younger sister. Amelia was 18, gentle-hearted and far too kind for a household like this one. Lady Margaret sighed with annoyance. "Very well. Send Amelia up." The footman disappeared. Moments later, Amelia hurried into the dressing chamber with curls slightly loosened from dancing and excitement glowing across her face. Unlike Evelyn, she still moved through life with softness untouched by fear. "You look beautiful," Amelia said immediately, crossing the room toward her sister. Then she noticed Evelyn's expression, the faint redness near her cheek. Her smile faltered. "Evelyn," Lady Margaret interrupted smoothly, "your sister is simply overtired." Amelia looked unconvinced but wisely remained silent. She had learned caution too, though not as painfully as Evelyn had. "The ballroom is asking for you," Amelia said gently. "Lady Pembroke keeps wondering where you disappeared to." "How thoughtful of her," Lady Margaret replied before Evelyn could speak. Amelia moved closer and discreetly slipped a folded handkerchief into Evelyn's palm. The gesture was small enough to escape their mother's notice. "You dropped this earlier," she whispered softly. Evelyn knew perfectly well she had not. Amelia had seen the blood near her mouth. The handkerchief was for that. Emotion threatened unexpectedly in Evelyn's throat. She squeezed her sister's fingers once in silent gratitude. Lady Margaret turned toward the door. "Come downstairs. And for once, Evelyn, try not to embarrass me." The three women descended together through the grand staircase overlooking the ballroom. Music floated upward beneath enormous crystal chandeliers. Laughter echoed through golden halls lined with portraits of long-dead ancestors. Every inch of Whitmore Manor radiated prestige, wealth, respectability. Evelyn moved carefully beside her mother, keeping her expression calm while whispers drifted through the crowd below. "Lady Margaret looks magnificent tonight, and her younger daughter is lovely. Which one is the eldest again?" "The quiet one. Poor thing. She has always looked so serious." Evelyn heard every word. She always did. At the foot of the staircase, guests turned politely toward them. Lady Margaret immediately transformed into the gracious hostess admired across London society, smiling warmly, greeting acquaintances with effortless charm. No trace remained of the woman upstairs. Evelyn often wondered whether her mother remembered which version of herself was real. "Miss Whitmore," Lord Everley approached with a practiced smile. He was handsome in the polished, forgettable way many aristocratic men were. "May I say you look enchanting this evening?" Evelyn forced herself to return the smile expected of her. "You are very kind, Lord Everley. Would you honor me with the next dance?" Before Evelyn could answer, Lady Margaret spoke from beside them. "My daughter would be delighted." Lord Everley bowed. "Excellent." As he walked away toward the dance floor, Amelia leaned closer to Evelyn. "You do not have to marry him if you do not wish to." Evelyn almost smiled at the innocence of that statement. "That is not how our world works." Amelia's expression dimmed sadly. Before she could reply, two older women passed nearby speaking in low voices. "Did you hear about Blackthorne?" one whispered. "The Duke. Apparently his estate lawyers arrived in London yesterday." "Then the rumors are true?" "It seems he finally intends to marry." Evelyn saw her mother's attention sharpen instantly at the mention of the name. Duke Adrian Blackthorne. Even among England's nobility, his reputation carried unusual weight. A war hero, cold-tempered, brilliant, one of the wealthiest men in the country. Some called him dangerous. Others called him ruthless. Most simply feared him. "I heard he refused 3 engagements last season," another guest murmured nearby. "A man like that does not marry for affection." "No duke does." Lady Margaret's eyes narrowed thoughtfully as she listened. Evelyn recognized that look immediately. Calculation, possibility, ambition awakening behind perfectly controlled features. Amelia glanced nervously toward their mother. She noticed it too. A few minutes later, while musicians prepared the next waltz, Evelyn stepped briefly into the adjoining corridor for air. The ballroom had grown too warm, too crowded. Her cheek still throbbed faintly beneath her powder. She pressed Amelia's handkerchief lightly against the corner of her mouth and closed her eyes for one brief moment of silence. Voices drifted from the nearby drawing room. Her mother's voice among them. Evelyn would have walked away immediately if not for the words that followed. "The Duke requires a wife quickly." Another woman laughed softly. "Then heaven help whichever girl he chooses." "Not necessarily," Lady Margaret replied. "A title like Blackthorne could restore nearly any family's fortunes." Evelyn frowned slightly. Restore? Whitmore finances were stable. At least that was what she had always been told. "But which daughter could possibly attract his attention?" someone asked. There was a short pause. Then Lady Margaret answered calmly, "Evelyn will do." Silence crashed through Evelyn's chest harder than any slap ever had. She stood frozen in the corridor while distant ballroom music continued somewhere beyond the walls. Evelyn will do. Not Evelyn might wish for this. Not Evelyn deserves happiness. Simply useful, suitable, disposable, like fabric chosen for a business arrangement. Inside the drawing room, the women continued discussing dowries and alliances in amused, elegant voices. Evelyn barely heard them anymore, because for the first time in her life, real fear began to bloom beneath her ribs. Not fear of another harsh word. Not fear of another humiliation. Something colder. Something larger. The terrible realization that her mother had already decided her future. And somewhere in London, a duke she had never met was about to become part of it. The following morning arrived beneath a curtain of pale gray rain that streaked the windows of Whitmore Manor and left the streets of Mayfair slick with cold February mist. Evelyn stood beside the breakfast table with both gloved hands clasped tightly before her waist while Lady Margaret reviewed correspondence in absolute silence. The clock on the mantel ticked steadily through the room. Every second tightened the knot already forming inside Evelyn's stomach. Amelia sat near the fire pretending to embroider, though her needle had not moved for several minutes. She kept glancing nervously between her sister and their mother. Finally, Lady Margaret folded one letter with deliberate care and placed it atop the others. "You will accompany me this afternoon." Evelyn lifted her eyes cautiously. "Where, mother?" "Blackthorne House." The words seemed to lower the room's temperature by several degrees. Amelia's embroidery hoop slipped from her hands onto the carpet. Lady Margaret ignored the interruption completely. "His Grace requested a private meeting after last evening's reception." Evelyn felt the blood drain slowly from her face. So quickly. The arrangement had moved forward so quickly. "I was not aware the Duke attended the reception," she said quietly. "He did not." Lady Margaret sipped her tea with elegant composure. However, certain conversations continued after midnight among more influential company. Evelyn understood immediately. Negotiations. Discussions conducted over brandy and politics while lives were exchanged like property. Amelia finally found her voice. "Mother, surely this is premature." Lady Margaret turned toward her younger daughter with visible irritation. "You are too young to understand the realities of our position." "What position?" Amelia asked softly. Silence settled for one dangerous moment. Evelyn watched her mother carefully. There it was again. That tiny flicker behind her expression whenever finances were mentioned. Fear. Lady Margaret set down her teacup. "Whitmore investments have suffered unfortunate losses over the past year." Amelia blinked in confusion. "You said father's estate was secure." "I said no such thing." Her tone sharpened instantly. You merely assumed. Evelyn remained perfectly still while realization slowly unfolded inside her chest. The lavish parties. The increasing tension among servants. The way several pieces of artwork had quietly disappeared from the hallways during the past month. She had noticed all of it without understanding the full truth. Whitmore Manor was drowning beneath polished silver and candlelight. Lady Margaret continued speaking in the same calm voice one might use to discuss weather. His Grace possesses enough influence to stabilize every difficulty facing this family. Evelyn stared at the untouched tea cooling beside her plate. And what does he receive in return? Her mother's gaze settled upon her with chilling directness. A wife. Amelia stood abruptly from her chair. You cannot simply offer Evelyn to a stranger. Watch your tone. I am speaking truthfully. Lady Margaret rose slowly to her feet. Truthfully? She repeated. Then let us speak honestly. Your sister is 23 years old with no engagement, no substantial dowry, and increasingly limited prospects. His Grace requires a Duchess. We require security. This arrangement benefits everyone. Except Evelyn, Amelia whispered. Lady Margaret's patience vanished completely. Enough. The single word cut through the room like ice. Amelia lowered her gaze immediately, though tears shimmered visibly in her eyes. Evelyn felt a familiar ache settle heavily inside her chest. She could endure almost anything directed toward herself. Watching Amelia suffer because of her was far more painful. I will prepare for this afternoon, Evelyn said quietly before the argument could worsen. Lady Margaret nodded once. Good. Then she added with disturbing softness, do not disappoint me. 2 hours later, Evelyn sat rigidly inside the Whitmore carriage as rain tapped softly against the windows. Across from her, Lady Margaret reviewed a list of estate accounts while speaking without looking up. You will not mention unnecessary personal matters. Evelyn stared toward the blurred streets passing outside. What qualifies as unnecessary? Your nervous disposition, your tendency toward melancholy, any childish ideas about affection. Her mother finally lifted her eyes. Men like the Duke of Blackthorne do not marry for romance. No, Evelyn replied faintly. I gathered that. Lady Margaret's expression hardened slightly at the tone. You would do well to remember your duty. Evelyn turned her gaze back toward the rain before her mother could study her expression too closely. Duty. The word had followed her throughout her entire life. Duty to family. Duty to reputation. Duty to silence. Never once had anyone spoken about happiness as though it were something she deserved. Blackthorne House emerged through the fog nearly 20 minutes later. The enormous London estate stood like a fortress of dark stone and iron gates overlooking the avenue. Unlike Whitmore Manor, which displayed wealth through beauty and social elegance, Blackthorne House radiated power. Controlled. Severe. Untouchable. Even the footmen waiting beneath the entrance carried themselves with military precision. Evelyn stepped from the carriage carefully, her boots touching rain-darkened stone. She instinctively tightened her cloak against the cold wind sweeping through the courtyard. Above them, towering windows reflected the gray sky like sheets of steel. Amelia would have hated this place, Evelyn thought suddenly. It looked too lonely. A butler escorted them through vast marble corridors lined with oil paintings and shadowed by towering ceilings. Every sound echoed softly beneath crystal chandeliers. No flowers brightened the hallways. No music drifted through the rooms. The house felt disciplined in a way that unsettled her immediately. His Grace will receive you in the west drawing room, the butler announced. Lady Margaret adjusted her gloves before entering. Remember yourself. Evelyn nearly smiled at the irony of that statement. The west drawing room overlooked rain-soaked gardens disappearing into mist beyond tall windows. A fire burned low near the far wall. Beside it stood a man dressed entirely in black. Duke Adrian Blackthorne turned slowly as they entered. For one suspended moment, Evelyn forgot to breathe. She had expected someone older somehow, more distant, more visibly cruel. Instead, the man before her carried the quiet stillness of someone accustomed to command without ever raising his voice. tall, broad-shouldered. Dark hair touched faintly with silver near the temples. Gray eyes sharp enough to unsettle even across the room. He did not possess the polished charm fashionable among London aristocrats. There was something colder about him, something disciplined, dangerous not because he displayed power, but because he never needed to. Lady Margaret curtsied gracefully. "Your Grace." "Lady Whitmore." His voice was deep and controlled. Then his gaze shifted toward Evelyn. "Miss Whitmore." Evelyn lowered into a proper curtsy despite the sudden nervous flutter beneath her ribs. "Your Grace." Silence followed briefly. Not awkward silence. Evaluating silence. She felt his attention settle upon her with unsettling precision. Most men observed beauty first. Duke Blackthorne seemed to notice details instead. Posture. Breathing. Hesitation. The slight stiffness in her shoulders. Lady Margaret smiled smoothly. "I hope we are not inconveniencing you this afternoon." "Not at all." He gestured toward the seating area near the fire. "Please." Tea arrived moments later, though very little conversation accompanied it initially. Lady Margaret filled the silence herself with polished observations regarding London society and charitable committees. The Duke responded politely when required but never encouraged unnecessary discussion. Evelyn sat quietly with her teacup untouched in her hands. She could feel him observing her occasionally across the room. Not admiring, studying. "Miss Whitmore," he said suddenly. The directness of his voice startled her enough that the porcelain rattled faintly against the saucer. "Forgive me." "There is nothing to forgive." Gray eyes rested steadily upon her. "You seem uncomfortable." Lady Margaret answered before Evelyn could. "My daughter is naturally reserved." "I see." But he continued looking at Evelyn rather than her mother. "Do you enjoy London society, Miss Whitmore?" The question itself felt unusual. Most men asked about music or embroidery or weather. "I find it educational," she replied carefully. One dark eyebrow lifted slightly. "Educational. One learns a great deal by observing people." For the first time, something almost resembling amusement flickered briefly across his expression. "An honest answer." Lady Margaret laughed lightly. "Evelyn spends too much time with books." "Books are often preferable to conversation," the Duke replied calmly. Silence followed again. Evelyn glanced toward him before she could stop herself. To her surprise, he was already watching her. Not with flirtation, with concentration, as though trying to solve something he did not entirely understand. Her pulse quickened unexpectedly. She lowered her gaze immediately and reached for her teacup again. That was when it happened. The edge of her glove shifted slightly beneath the sleeve of her gown, just enough to expose the fading bruise circling her wrist. Evelyn saw his eyes move toward it instantly. Everything inside her body went rigid. She pulled the sleeve downward too quickly, too obviously. The room seemed to still around them. Lady Margaret continued speaking without noticing anything. But the Duke had noticed. Evelyn knew he had. She could feel the subtle change in the air itself. His expression did not alter outwardly. He simply set down his teacup with controlled precision. "Lady Whitmore," he said evenly, "would you allow me a few moments alone with your daughter?" Complete silence crashed through the room. Lady Margaret blinked once in visible surprise before recovering smoothly. "Of course, Your Grace." She rose gracefully from her chair. "I shall wait in the adjoining salon." Evelyn felt sudden panic tighten painfully in her chest as the door closed behind her mother. Alone now, the vast drawing room seemed even quieter than before. Rain whispered softly against the windows. Firelight flickered across dark wood paneling. The Duke remained seated across from her for several long seconds without speaking. Evelyn kept her eyes lowered toward her lap. "Miss Whitmore." His voice had softened slightly. "Who hurt your wrist?" Fear moved through her so quickly it almost felt physical. Not because of the question itself. Because no one had ever asked before. Not truly. She forced herself to answer carefully. "It is nothing, Your Grace. That was not my question." Her fingers tightened around the porcelain cup. "I injured it accidentally." Another silence followed. Heavy. Measured. Then he said quietly, "You are a poor liar." Evelyn's breath caught. Slowly, she lifted her gaze toward him. The Duke's expression remained calm, but his eyes had sharpened with unmistakable focus. For the first time since entering Blackthorne House, Evelyn realized something deeply unsettling. This man saw too much, and somehow she suspected that was dangerous for both of them. Evelyn did not remember leaving Blackthorne House. Later, she would recall fragments only. The relentless rain against the carriage roof. Lady Margaret's satisfied silence beside her. The iron weight lodged beneath her ribs that refused to ease no matter how carefully she breathed. By the time they returned to Whitmore Manor, dusk had already begun swallowing the pale winter light outside the windows. Servants moved quietly through the halls, lighting candles one by one, while shadows gathered along the ceilings like dark water. Evelyn climbed the staircase slowly, still hearing the Duke's voice in her mind. "You are a poor liar." No accusation had ever unsettled her more, because he had not sounded cruel when he said it, only certain. Amelia appeared outside Evelyn's bedchamber almost immediately after dinner trays were dismissed. She slipped inside and shut the door softly behind her before crossing the room with visible concern. How bad was it? Evelyn stood near the fireplace, removing her gloves with careful movements. The bruise near her wrist had darkened faintly beneath the candlelight. "Worse than I expected." Amelia lowered herself onto the edge of the chaise lounge. "Did he frighten you?" Evelyn hesitated. That answer felt strangely complicated. "Not in the way I expected." Amelia frowned slightly. "What does that mean?" Evelyn stared into the fire. "Most men look at me and see exactly what mother wishes them to see. And the Duke." She swallowed carefully. "I think he notices things he is not supposed to." Silence settled softly between them. Amelia studied her sister's face for a moment before speaking again. "Mother has been impossible all evening. I gathered as much. She sent 3 letters immediately after we returned." Amelia twisted the ribbon around her wrist nervously. "I overheard Mr. Holloway speaking with one of the footmen. Apparently several creditors have begun demanding payment." Evelyn closed her eyes briefly. So it was true. Worse than true. Desperate. How long have things been this bad? Amelia shook her head helplessly. "I do not know. But father's investments were already failing before he died. Mother kept borrowing against the estate afterward." Evelyn sank slowly into the chair beside the fire. A strange numbness spread quietly through her chest. Her entire life suddenly rearranged itself into clearer shape. Every cruel lesson, every impossible expectation, every reminder that daughters existed to secure survival. Lady Margaret had not merely become harsh after her husband's death. Fear had sharpened her into something colder. Amelia reached toward her carefully. "You do not have to agree to this marriage." Evelyn almost laughed at the innocence still lingering in her sister's voice. "I do." "No." Amelia's eyes filled suddenly with tears. "You always surrender before anyone even asks what you want." The word struck harder than intended. Evelyn looked down at her hands resting quietly in her lap. Pale fingers. Steady now. Controlled. Wanting things has never changed anything. Amelia opened her mouth to argue further but stopped when footsteps approached outside the hallway. Both sisters stiffened instinctively. A moment later, Lady Margaret entered without knocking. Her sharp gaze moved immediately between them. "Amelia, leave us." Amelia rose reluctantly. "Mother, Evelyn is tired. And you are becoming tiresome." Her tone remained perfectly smooth. "Go downstairs." Amelia glanced helplessly toward Evelyn before finally leaving the room. The door clicked shut behind her. Lady Margaret walked toward the fireplace with measured elegance, though tension radiated beneath every graceful movement. "His Grace has requested another meeting tomorrow." Evelyn felt her stomach tighten. "Tomorrow? At Blackthorne Manor? Why?" Lady Margaret's expression cooled instantly. "Do not behave foolishly. A duke does not propose marriage after one conversation." Evelyn lowered her gaze. "Of course. You will wear the silver gown." Her mother paused briefly. And cover your wrist properly this time. Heat rushed suddenly into Evelyn's face. So she had noticed after all. Lady Margaret's eyes narrowed sharply. What exactly did you say to him while I was gone? Nothing inappropriate. Do not test my patience. Evelyn forced herself to remain calm beneath the familiar pressure building inside the room. He asked about the bruise. I told him it was accidental. A dangerous stillness entered her mother's expression. And did he believe you? Evelyn hesitated 1 second too long. Lady Margaret stepped closer immediately. Evelyn, I do not know. Her mother's jaw tightened subtly. You will know tomorrow. Because if you jeopardize this arrangement with childish weakness, I promise you the consequences will be severe. Evelyn felt herself go cold. Not from fear exactly. Exhaustion. The endless exhaustion of being spoken to like a burden rather than a daughter. Lady Margaret studied her for another long moment before finally turning toward the door. You will marry well, she said quietly without looking back. Whether you deserve it or not. After she left, Evelyn remained motionless beside the fire until the flames burned low. Sleep came late that night and without peace. She dreamed of endless corridors lined with mirrors reflecting different versions of herself. Dutiful daughter, silent ornament, future Duchess. None of them looked alive. The following afternoon arrived clear and bitterly cold after the previous day's rain. Thin frost coated the carriage windows as Whitmore horses carried Evelyn once more toward Blackthorne House. This time Lady Margaret remained behind, claiming a prior engagement. Evelyn suspected the Duke had requested her absence directly. The realization unsettled her more than she wished to admit. She arrived alone beneath a sky the color of steel. A footman escorted her immediately toward the library rather than the drawing room. The difference felt intentional somehow. More private. More dangerous. The library stretched across nearly the entire western side of the estate. Towering shelves rose toward shadowed ceilings lined with thousands of leather-bound volumes. Tall windows overlooked frozen gardens dusted white beneath winter sunlight. A fire crackled softly near the center of the room where Duke Adrian Blackthorne stood beside a massive oak desk reviewing documents. He looked up the moment she entered. Miss Whitmore. Evelyn lowered into a graceful curtsy despite the sudden nervous flutter inside her chest. Your Grace. He dismissed the footman with a slight motion of his hand. Once the door closed, silence settled around them again. Yet unlike the previous afternoon, this silence did not feel formal. Felt watchful. The Duke crossed the room slowly toward her. Today he wore dark gray rather than black, though the severe tailoring only emphasized the controlled strength in his posture. He stopped several feet away, close enough that she could detect faint traces of sandalwood and winter air lingering around him. Thank you for returning. I was instructed to do so. One dark eyebrow lifted slightly. Instructed. Evelyn immediately regretted the honesty. Forgive me. That sounded ungrateful. No, he said quietly. It sounded truthful. Heat rose faintly beneath her skin. She looked away first. The Duke studied her for another moment before gesturing toward the fire. Please sit. Evelyn lowered herself carefully onto the velvet settee while he remained standing beside the mantel. The imbalance unsettled her strangely. It made her feel observed from above. Tea? He asked. No, thank you. You seem nervous. I believe that has already been established. Something almost resembling amusement flickered across his face again. Brief. Controlled. Dangerous precisely because it was so rare. Most people are nervous around me. Are you surprised? Not particularly. He rested one hand against the mantel. What surprises me is that you appear nervous in your own home as well. Evelyn froze. He noticed that too. The way she listened for footsteps. The way her shoulders tightened whenever doors opened unexpectedly. The way apology lingered instinctively beneath every sentence. She folded her hands together tightly in her lap. You are very observant, Your Grace. It is a necessary habit. For war. The question escaped before she could stop it. Silence followed briefly. Among other things, he replied. Evelyn had heard stories about him before. Everyone in London had. The Duke who negotiated military campaigns before 30. The aristocrat who rebuilt northern trade routes after the war. The man politicians feared because he rarely spoke unnecessarily and never forgot anything once noticed. Yet standing here now, none of those stories unsettled her as much as the simple reality of his attention focused entirely upon her. "Tell me something honestly, Miss Whitmore." His voice lowered slightly. "Are you afraid of marrying me?" The question stole her breath for one suspended moment. She looked toward him carefully. The firelight softened nothing about his expression. He waited with unnerving patience. Evelyn considered lying again. It would be easier, safer. Instead, she heard herself answer quietly, "I do not know you well enough to fear you properly." The faintest shift touched his mouth. Not a smile exactly. Interest perhaps. Another honest answer. "You asked for honesty. Most people still choose deception." Evelyn stared toward the fire. Sometimes deception is safer. Silence fell once more. Heavy now. Thoughtful. Then she heard him move closer. Her body reacted before her mind did. A slight flinch. Barely visible. Yet his footsteps stopped immediately. Evelyn realized what she had done 1 second too late. Shame flooded through her chest. "I apologize." His expression changed instantly. Not anger. Something far more unsettling. Understanding. "Do not apologize for instinct." Her throat tightened unexpectedly. No one had ever said something like that to her before. Not once. The Duke remained still several feet away, as though careful not to crowd her further. "Miss Whitmore." His voice had grown quieter now. Softer in a way that somehow made him more dangerous rather than less. "Who taught you to be afraid of every room you enter?" Panic moved sharply through Evelyn's chest. Too close. He was getting too close to truths she had spent years burying beneath silence and manners and careful obedience. She rose abruptly from the settee before she could stop herself. "Your Grace, I believe this conversation has become inappropriate." He watched her carefully. "Has it?" "Yes. Because I asked difficult questions?" Evelyn looked toward the towering windows rather than his face. Snow drifted lightly beyond the glass. Everything outside appeared cold and distant and far easier to survive than this conversation. "You should not concern yourself with private family matters. Yet I find myself doing exactly that." Her pulse quickened painfully. "Why?" The question escaped softly before she could reconsider. The Duke held her gaze for a long moment. Then he answered with quiet certainty that unsettled her more than anything else he had said so far. "Because every time someone enters this room unexpectedly, you look like you are preparing to be punished." Silence crashed between them. Evelyn felt the blood drain slowly from her face. She had hidden it for years. Hidden it from servants. From society. From herself sometimes. Yet this man had noticed within 2 meetings. Her voice barely emerged above a whisper. "You are mistaken." The Duke's gray eyes never left hers. "No," he said quietly. "I do not think I am." By the end of the week, London society had already begun whispering about the approaching Blackthorne engagement. Invitations arrived daily at Whitmore Manor. Florists appeared carrying winter roses imported from France. Dressmakers worked past midnight under Lady Margaret's increasingly sharp supervision, while servants hurried through the halls preparing for a wedding that seemed to materialize almost overnight. Evelyn moved through it all like someone watching another woman's life unfold from a distance. She answered questions when required, stood still for fittings, accepted congratulations from guests whose smiles never reached their eyes. Inside, she felt only exhaustion. The Duke visited Whitmore Manor exactly twice during the engagement period. Both times, his presence altered the atmosphere of the house immediately. Servants straightened faster. Conversations quieted. Even Lady Margaret became more measured beneath his attention. Yet what unsettled Evelyn most was not his authority. It was the way his gaze always found her first whenever he entered a room. Not possessive. Not romantic. A quiet assessment that made her feel dangerously visible. During his second visit, She stood beside the drawing-room window while guests discussed wedding plans around them. Snow drifted softly beyond the glass, covering the city in pale silver. "You dislike all of this?" the Duke said quietly beside her. Evelyn kept her eyes on the street below. "Would it matter if I did?" "Yes." The answer came without hesitation. She turned slightly toward him then, surprised by the certainty in his voice. "Why?" "Because I have no interest in dragging unwilling people through my life." Something tightened unexpectedly in her chest. Before she could respond, Lady Margaret approached carrying a stack of invitation cards. "Your Grace, Lady Pembroke insists upon hosting a reception after the ceremony." The Duke's expression cooled instantly into aristocratic politeness. "As she wishes." Evelyn watched the change carefully. Around everyone else, he wore control like armor. Around her, the edges occasionally slipped. That frightened her more than coldness would have. 3 weeks later, the wedding morning arrived beneath a clear winter sky bright enough to hurt her eyes. Whitmore Manor erupted into frantic movement before sunrise. Maids rushed through corridors carrying heated water and pressed silk. Jewel cases lay open across every surface inside Evelyn's bedchamber. Fresh white roses filled the air with heavy perfume that made her slightly nauseous. She stood silently before the mirror while 2 seamstresses adjusted the final layers of her ivory gown. The fabric shimmered softly beneath candlelight, elegant enough to transform any woman into a duchess. Evelyn barely recognized herself wearing it. "You look beautiful, Miss Evelyn," one of the younger maids whispered carefully. Evelyn managed a faint smile. "Thank you." The maid hesitated before adding softly, "His Grace seems kind." Before Evelyn could answer, the door opened sharply. Lady Margaret entered dressed in dark emerald silk and diamonds severe enough to resemble armor. Her eyes swept critically across the room. "Leave us." The maids disappeared immediately. Silence settled heavily after the door shut behind them. Lady Margaret approached the mirror slowly until she stood directly behind Evelyn's reflection. "Today determines the future of this family." Evelyn kept her hands folded tightly together. "I understand." "Do you?" Her mother's voice sharpened slightly. "Because I am growing tired of your melancholy expression." Evelyn stared at herself in the mirror. Pale skin, careful posture. "Eyes too tired for someone only 23 years old." "I am not attempting to embarrass you." Lady Margaret stepped closer and adjusted the delicate veil resting over Evelyn's shoulders. Her movements appeared gentle to anyone observing from outside the room. Evelyn knew better. "You will remember your responsibilities once you become Duchess of Blackthorne." "Yes, Mother." "You will behave properly. You will not burden your husband with emotional weakness. And above all, you will not forget who secured this marriage for you." Evelyn's throat tightened painfully. "Of course." Lady Margaret reached for her daughter's hand then. At first the gesture almost resembled affection. Then her fingers tightened hard enough around Evelyn's wrist to send sharp pain through the healing bruise beneath her glove. Evelyn inhaled sharply before she could stop herself. "Do not disappoint me today," her mother said softly. The pressure increased another fraction, invisible beneath lace and silk. "Do you understand?" "Yes." Evelyn forced the word past the ache in her throat. "I understand." Lady Margaret released her immediately and stepped back as though nothing unusual had occurred. "Good." A knock interrupted them moments later. Amelia entered carrying a small bouquet of winter lilies. Her eyes brightened briefly when she saw Evelyn fully dressed. Then concern flickered across her expression almost instantly. She noticed the tension in Evelyn's shoulders, the unnatural stillness around their mother. Amelia crossed the room quickly and placed the flowers gently into Evelyn's hands. "For luck," she whispered. Emotion threatened suddenly behind Evelyn's ribs. She squeezed her sister's fingers once. "Thank you." Lady Margaret glanced toward the clock. "The carriage is ready." The journey to St. Bartholomew Chapel passed in near silence beneath pale morning sunlight. Crowds already lined the streets outside the church by the time the Whitmore carriage arrived. Reporters, curious spectators, members of aristocratic society eager to witness the season's most powerful union. Footmen opened the carriage doors while camera flashes burst sharply through the winter air. Evelyn stepped carefully onto the stone pathway. Her gown rustled softly around her feet. White roses decorated the chapel entrance. Bells echoed overhead. Everything appeared beautiful enough to belong in someone else's dream. "Smile," Lady Margaret murmured beside her. Evelyn obeyed automatically. Inside the chapel, candlelight glowed across towering stained-glass windows while England's elite filled polished wooden pews. Lords, ladies, politicians, wealthy families desperate to remain close to Blackthorne influence. Every face turned toward Evelyn as she entered. Heat rose faintly beneath her skin beneath the sheer weight of their attention. Then she saw him waiting near the altar. Duke Adrian Blackthorne stood dressed entirely in black formal attire that made the white marble behind him appear dim by comparison. Tall, motionless, controlled. Yet the moment his eyes found her across the chapel, something in his expression changed slightly. Not softened exactly, focused, as though the noise and movement surrounding them had disappeared completely. Evelyn felt her pulse quicken unexpectedly. Lady Margaret tightened her grip briefly around Evelyn's arm before guiding her forward. The chapel music swelled around them while guests whispered behind jeweled fans. Every step toward the altar felt strangely unreal. Then another sharp pulse of pain shot suddenly through her wrist. Lady Margaret's fingers had tightened again beneath the lace sleeve. Hard enough to warn. Hard enough to remind. Evelyn's breath caught painfully. She stumbled almost imperceptibly. Across the altar, the Duke noticed immediately. His expression sharpened. By the time Evelyn reached him, her hand had begun trembling faintly beneath the bouquet. The Duke lowered his gaze toward her gloved wrist for one brief second before offering his arm. "Are you unwell?" he asked quietly. "I am fine. You are pale. It is only the heat." His gray eyes rested on her face another moment too long. Then the ceremony began before further questions could follow. The bishop's voice echoed through the chapel while sunlight streamed across polished stone floors. Evelyn answered every vow correctly, though the words felt distant in her mouth. Honor, devotion, protection. Strange promises spoken between two people who barely understood each other. Yet throughout the ceremony, she remained painfully aware of the Duke beside her. The stillness in his posture, the restraint in every movement, the unsettling way he occasionally glanced toward her whenever voices rose too sharply within the chapel, as though monitoring reactions she herself no longer noticed. When the bishop finally declared them husband and wife, applause swept softly through the church. Cameras flashed again. Society smiled approvingly. Lady Margaret looked triumphant. Evelyn felt numb. The wedding reception consumed the remainder of the afternoon in a blur of crystal glasses and endless conversation. Guests crowded Blackthorne Manor, congratulating the newly married couple, while musicians played near towering arrangements of white roses. The Duke remained polite throughout every introduction and speech, though Evelyn noticed how little he actually spoke. He observed more than participated. Occasionally she would feel his gaze settle briefly upon her from across the ballroom. Each time, nervous tension curled quietly through her stomach. By evening, exhaustion pressed heavily behind her eyes. She stood near one of the ballroom windows trying to breathe through the suffocating heat when the Duke approached holding 2 untouched glasses of champagne. "You have not eaten since noon," he said quietly. Evelyn accepted one glass automatically, though she did not drink from it. "I was not hungry. That is not healthy." The concern in his voice unsettled her more than indifference would have. "Your Grace." She lowered her voice carefully. "You do not need to concern yourself so deeply with my condition. You are now my wife." The simple statement stole her breath unexpectedly. Before she could answer, another couple approached requesting a dance from the Duke. He declined politely. The woman looked visibly shocked. Evelyn almost understood why. Duke Blackthorne moved through society like a man enduring obligations rather than enjoying them. Yet somehow he remained standing beside her instead. An hour later, the final guests finally departed beneath cold midnight skies. Silence settled gradually across Blackthorne Manor after the enormous front doors closed behind the last carriage. Servants disappeared upstairs. Fires burned lower. The wedding day had ended. Reality waited quietly beyond it. Evelyn stood alone inside the grand bridal suite, staring at unfamiliar surroundings lit softly by candlelight. Massive windows overlooked snow-covered gardens beyond the estate. A fire crackled gently beside carved oak furniture and towering velvet curtains. Everything about the room reflected wealth powerful enough to reshape entire lives. Yet none of it eased the nervous tightness inside her chest. A soft knock interrupted the silence. Evelyn turned instinctively toward the door just as the Duke entered. He had removed his formal jacket and loosened his collar slightly, though exhaustion only seemed to sharpen the severe lines of his face rather than soften them. For one suspended moment, neither spoke. Then he closed the door quietly behind him. "You look frightened," he said. Evelyn tightened her fingers together. "Should I not be?" Something unreadable flickered across his expression. "No," he crossed toward the fireplace but stopped several feet away from her, deliberately distant. "You need not fear me, Evelyn." Hearing her given name in his voice unsettled her unexpectedly. Too intimate, too gentle. She lowered her gaze quickly. "I do not know how to do this." Silence followed softly between them. Then the Duke spoke with calm certainty. "Neither do I." She looked up in surprise. He exhaled slowly and reached toward the crystal decanter near the fire without pouring himself anything. "I did not marry because I desired obedience." His gaze returned toward her. "Nor do I expect perfection from you." Emotion tightened suddenly in Evelyn's throat. Dangerous emotion, the kind she had spent years suppressing. She stepped backward slightly without realizing it. The movement caused the delicate lace at her shoulder to shift faintly beneath the candlelight. And for the first time, the Duke saw the pale marks hidden near the edge of her collarbone. Old fading bruises, barely visible, but unmistakable once noticed. Everything in the room changed instantly. The Duke went completely still. Evelyn realized too late what had happened. Panic rushed through her chest. She reached instinctively for the lace neckline, trying to pull it higher. His voice lowered dangerously. "Evelyn." She could not breathe properly. "It is nothing." He crossed the room slowly now, though not aggressively. Carefully. His gray eyes remained fixed on the faint marks disappearing beneath silk and lace. "Who did that to you?" Fear crashed violently beneath her ribs because for the first time since childhood, someone sounded less horrified by her injuries than by the fact they existed at all. The room remained perfectly still after his question. Firelight flickered softly across the walls of the bridal suite, while snow drifted beyond the tall windows in silence. Evelyn could hear her own heartbeat far too clearly. Duke Adrian Blackthorne stood only a few feet away now, close enough that she could see the tension hardening the lines of his jaw beneath the candlelight. Yet he did not reach toward her again, did not corner her. That restraint frightened her almost more than anger would have, because no one had ever stopped after noticing before. They either ignored what they saw or demanded explanations she could never safely give. "No one," she whispered finally. The lie sounded weak even to her own ears. The Duke's expression did not change. "Evelyn." Her name in his voice carried dangerous patience. She tightened both hands around the lace fabric at her waist. "Please." Something flickered briefly through his eyes then. Not victory, not satisfaction, understanding. He stepped back first. The movement startled her more than if he had advanced. "Very well," he said quietly. Evelyn blinked once in confusion. "You are not going to ask again?" "Not tonight." Relief swept through her so suddenly it nearly left her dizzy. Yet beneath that relief came another feeling she could not fully understand. Disappointment, perhaps. The realization that part of her had wanted someone to insist she mattered enough to question further. The thought unsettled her deeply. The Duke moved toward the fireplace and rested one hand lightly against the mantel. "You are exhausted." Evelyn lowered her gaze quickly. "It has been a long day." "Yes." Silence stretched softly between them again. Then he said, "There are adjoining rooms prepared for you if you prefer privacy tonight." Her head lifted immediately in surprise. Most aristocratic marriages were not built around preference. You would allow that? One dark eyebrow lifted slightly. Allow? Heat rose faintly beneath her skin. Forgive me. I only meant... I know what you meant. His voice remained calm. And the answer is yes. Evelyn stared at him for several suspended seconds. Everything about this marriage still felt unreal. The enormous estate. The strange gentleness hidden beneath his severe composure. The unsettling fact that he seemed more concerned with her comfort than with his authority. She had spent her entire life preparing for endurance. Not kindness. Kindness left her defenseless. "Thank you," she said quietly. The Duke inclined his head once. "Get some rest." He turned toward the door then, pausing only briefly before leaving. "Good night, Evelyn." The door closed softly behind him. Evelyn remained standing motionless beside the fire long after he disappeared. The next morning arrived pale and cold beneath a sky heavy with winter clouds. Evelyn woke disoriented at first, surrounded by unfamiliar silk curtains and the distant ticking of a clock somewhere beyond the walls. Then memory returned all at once. Marriage. Blackthorne Manor. The Duke's eyes fixed upon the fading bruises near her collarbone. A maid arrived shortly afterward carrying breakfast and fresh clothing for the morning. Unlike the servants at Whitmore Manor, this young woman did not avoid eye contact or move with frightened hesitation. "Good morning, Your Grace," she said warmly while arranging tea near the fire. The title startled Evelyn slightly. "Your Grace. Duchess." The words still felt borrowed somehow. "Good morning." The maid smiled politely. "His Grace requested that you not be disturbed early. He said you looked tired." Evelyn stared down at the untouched teacup in her hands. Such a small observation. Yet no one had ever protected her rest before. By noon, the house had settled into quiet routine. Blackthorne Manor functioned with smooth precision absent from the constant tension at Whitmore House. No raised voices echoed through the halls. No servants rushed fearfully from room to room. The silence here felt calm rather than dangerous. Evelyn wandered carefully through the West Gallery after breakfast, studying snow-covered gardens beyond enormous windows while trying to quiet the unease still lingering inside her chest. She heard the Duke before seeing him. Measured footsteps approaching across polished marble floors. Instinct tightened through her body immediately, shoulders stiffening, breath catching. Then frustration followed swiftly behind it. Even here, even now, she hated how deeply fear had rooted itself beneath her skin. "You are difficult to surprise," the Duke observed quietly as he joined her beside the window. Evelyn kept her gaze on the gardens outside. "I have spent years listening for footsteps." Silence followed. Heavy now. He had noticed the truth hidden inside that sentence. Of course he had. "Do you enjoy the gardens?" he asked after a moment. The change in subject felt intentional, merciful. "They are beautiful." Snow drifted softly over dark hedges and frozen fountains below. "Who designed them?" "My mother." Evelyn looked toward him in surprise. "Your mother?" She preferred landscapes that appeared orderly from a distance but wild once explored closely. Something quieter entered his expression briefly. Memory, perhaps. Most people misunderstood her. Evelyn found herself asking before caution could stop her. "Did you?" His gaze shifted toward the windows. No, the simple answer lingered strangely between them. She realized suddenly how little she knew about him beyond reputation and whispers. War hero. Ruthless negotiator. Powerful Duke. None of those stories explained the man standing quietly beside her discussing gardens beneath winter light. A servant approached discreetly moments later carrying correspondence on a silver tray. "Your Grace." The Duke accepted the letters with a nod. His eyes skimmed the top envelope before his expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "Thank you." The servant departed silently. Evelyn tried not to notice the tension settling across his shoulders. "Bad news?" she asked softly. He glanced toward her briefly. "Not unexpected news." He folded the letter once. "One of my northern factories suffered an accident last month. Compensation negotiations continue." Evelyn hesitated. Were people injured? 3 men. The answer came immediately. 1 seriously. Concern crossed her expression before she could hide it. That is terrible. The Duke studied her quietly for 1 long second. Most aristocratic women ask how much the damages will cost. Heat touched her cheeks faintly. And what do most aristocratic men ask? Something unreadable flickered through his eyes. Usually whether the newspapers discovered it. Against all reason, a small smile threatened briefly at the corners of Evelyn's mouth. Tiny. Fleeting. Yet the Duke noticed. She knew he noticed because his expression softened for half a heartbeat before returning to careful restraint. Dangerous. This was dangerous. She stepped away from the window before the moment could become something neither of them understood. I should write to Amelia. Of course. Yet as she turned to leave, his voice stopped her again. Evelyn. She looked back carefully. Yes. The Duke seemed to consider his next words with unusual caution. No one in this house will harm you. Emotion struck unexpectedly through her chest. Sharp enough to almost hurt. She lowered her gaze immediately because she did not trust her expression. You cannot promise that. Yes, he said quietly. I can. She escaped to the writing room before he could see how badly those words affected her. The remainder of the week passed in uneasy stillness. London society celebrated the Blackthorne marriage enthusiastically. Invitations flooded the manor daily. Articles praising the new Duchess appeared across society columns. To the outside world, everything appeared perfect. Inside Blackthorne Manor, something quieter unfolded instead. The Duke never pressed her for answers regarding the bruises. Never demanded explanations. Yet Evelyn constantly felt his awareness surrounding her. At dinner, he noticed when she barely touched her food. During carriage rides, he adjusted conversations whenever crowds made her uncomfortable. Twice she caught him watching carefully whenever unexpected noises caused her to tense. He said nothing about it. Somehow that silence became more intimate than questions. For nights after the wedding, a winter storm swept across London hard enough to rattle windows throughout the estate. Wind howled through the gardens while snow battered the glass in restless waves. Evelyn sat alone in the library, unable to sleep, wrapped in a pale shawl beside the fire. She had always hated storms. At Whitmore Manor, storms usually meant her mother's temper worsening by morning. The library door opened quietly near midnight. The Duke entered carrying several files beneath one arm before stopping when he noticed her awake. I did not expect company. Evelyn set aside the untouched book resting in her lap. I could not sleep. His gaze moved briefly toward the storm outside. Neither could I, apparently. He crossed toward the drinks cabinet but poured himself only water before joining her near the fire. For several minutes, silence settled comfortably between them while wind rattled the windows overhead. Strangely, the quiet no longer felt strained. When I was younger, Evelyn said suddenly before she could reconsider, I used to count thunder between lightning strikes. The Duke glanced toward her. Why? She stared into the flames. It distracted me. He understood immediately. She could feel it in the stillness that followed. How old were you when the bruises began? Her breath caught softly. The question had finally arrived. Yet his voice carried no accusation. Only quiet concern. Evelyn tightened her fingers around the edge of the shawl. I do not remember exactly. That young? Mother believed discipline built character. The words emerged flatly. Practiced. And did it? Evelyn almost answered automatically. Then she stopped. The fire crackled softly between them. Outside, snow struck the windows in restless bursts. No, she whispered finally. Silence settled heavily through the room. The Duke's jaw tightened visibly, though his voice remained controlled. Your father allowed this? Pain flickered unexpectedly through her chest at the mention of him. Not at first. She swallowed carefully. Things became worse after he died. Why? Evelyn stared into the flames. Because I reminded her of him. The Duke said nothing. She continued before fear could silence her again. My father used to tell me I asked too many questions. He said intelligent women frightened weak men. A faint ache touched her throat. Mother hated when he said things like that. And after he died? Evelyn's smile held no warmth. There was no one left to disagree with her. Wind thundered softly against the manor walls. The Duke remained very still beside her. She could almost feel the anger radiating beneath his restraint now. Not explosive anger. Colder. More dangerous. Did anyone know? He asked quietly. Evelyn thought of terrified servants. Distant relatives pretending not to notice. Society women praising Lady Margaret's devotion. People see what is convenient, she said softly. And children become very skilled at hiding pain when they know no one intends to stop it. The room fell silent again. Evelyn realized suddenly how much she had revealed. Panic stirred faintly beneath her ribs. She rose too quickly from the chair. I should not have said any of that. The Duke stood immediately as well. Evelyn, please forget it. Her breathing had grown uneven now. Too exposed. Too vulnerable. I was tired. I spoke carelessly. No, his voice deepened slightly. You spoke honestly. She shook her head once. You do not understand what my mother is capable of. His expression changed then. Something cold entering his eyes with terrifying clarity. No, he said quietly. I believe I am beginning to. The storm howled louder beyond the windows. Firelight flickered sharply across the library walls while silence stretched between them. Then the Duke spoke again. Calm. Controlled. Final. I want the names of every servant who worked at Whitmore Manor during your childhood. Evelyn stared at him in shock. Why? His gray eyes never left hers. Because I intend to learn exactly what happened to you. 3 days after the storm, London society welcomed the new Duchess of Blackthorne with the kind of dazzling cruelty only aristocratic circles could disguise as admiration. The Harrington Winter Gala filled nearly every chamber of the enormous estate with silk gowns, candlelight, and carefully measured smiles. Music drifted through the ballroom beneath glittering chandeliers while servants moved silently between guests carrying silver trays of champagne. From a distance, everything looked beautiful. Evelyn stood near the grand staircase wearing midnight blue silk chosen personally by the Duke's tailor. Sapphire earrings rested against her throat. Her dark hair had been arranged elegantly above one shoulder. To anyone observing her across the ballroom, she appeared every inch the perfect Duchess. Inside, her stomach had been tight since arriving. She could feel the whispers already moving through the crowd like invisible currents. That is Lady Margaret Whitmore. The woman beside the minister? Yes, remarkable family. And now her daughter married Blackthorne himself. Evelyn followed the direction of their gaze automatically. Lady Margaret stood near the center of the ballroom surrounded by admirers, radiant in silver silk beneath crystal light. Laughter flowed easily around her. Men praised her intelligence. Women admired her grace. She moved through society exactly as she always had. Untouchable. Watching her now, no one would imagine fear existed anywhere near her presence. The contradiction made Evelyn suddenly cold. You are staring at your mother as though you expect her to draw blood. The Duke's low voice beside her pulled her back instantly. She had not even noticed him approach. Forgive me. Stop apologizing. The words came quietly, though not unkindly. Evelyn lowered her gaze. The Duke remained beside her near the staircase, one hand resting casually behind his back while his eyes swept calmly across the ballroom. Tonight he wore black formal attire severe enough to make every other gentleman in the room appear ornamental by comparison. Yet despite the elegance surrounding him, there remained something dangerous in his stillness. Something people sensed instinctively. Your mother has greeted 23 people in the last 10 minutes, he observed. None of them realized she was lying to every one of them. Evelyn glanced toward him sharply. What do you mean? She informed Lord Ashcombe that Whitmore shipping accounts remain stable. His expression cooled slightly. They do not. A pulse of unease moved through Evelyn's chest. You investigated our finances. I investigate everything connected to my household. His gaze shifted briefly toward her. Including you. Heat touched her skin faintly beneath the ballroom lights. Before she could respond, Lady Margaret herself appeared beside them with graceful precision. "Your Grace." She smiled warmly. "Everyone is delighted by how devoted you appear to my daughter already." The Duke's expression became unreadable. "How fortunate for everyone." Lady Margaret either ignored the sharpness beneath the reply or pretended not to notice it. "Evelyn, darling, Lady Pembroke has been asking after you." Evelyn turned automatically toward the older woman approaching across the ballroom. "Of course." Lady Pembroke greeted her enthusiastically moments later. "Your Grace, you look absolutely radiant tonight. You are very kind. And your husband has become the envy of every unmarried lady in London." The older woman laughed behind her jeweled fan. "Though I suppose that was inevitable." Lady Margaret smiled smoothly beside them. "The Duke has always been a man of excellent judgment." Evelyn nearly flinched at the statement, because she understood exactly what her mother truly meant. He chose correctly. He purchased the proper solution. The ballroom doors opened suddenly before further conversation could follow. A hush swept gradually through the crowd as another group of guests arrived. Evelyn recognized Amelia immediately among them. Relief loosened something tight inside her chest. Her younger sister hurried across the ballroom with visible excitement brightening her face. "Evelyn." Amelia embraced her carefully before stepping back to admire the gown. "You look beautiful. You say that every time you see me, because it remains true." The warmth between them softened some of the tension pressing against Evelyn's ribs all evening. Yet as Amelia greeted the Duke politely, Evelyn noticed something else. Fear flickering briefly across her sister's expression whenever Lady Margaret looked away from the surrounding guests. Tiny, almost invisible, but there. The same fear Evelyn knew too well. "Mother has been unbearable all week," Amelia whispered quietly once Lady Margaret became distracted by another conversation. "She dismissed 2 more servants yesterday." Evelyn's pulse quickened slightly. "Why?" "One supposedly stole silverware." Amelia hesitated. "But Mrs. Aldridge told me the maid had threatened to speak with someone from the estate office." The ballroom suddenly felt warmer. Louder. "Speak about what?" "She did not say." Amelia lowered her voice further. "But she disappeared this morning before sunrise." Evelyn stared toward the glittering crowd surrounding her mother. Lady Margaret laughed softly at something a politician had just said. Elegant, charming, untouchable. The image made her stomach twist painfully. The Duke had gone very still beside them. "What was the maid's name?" he asked quietly. Amelia looked startled by the directness. "Clara, Your Grace. She worked in the East Wing for several years." "How long?" "Since Evelyn was 16, I believe." Something dangerous shifted behind the Duke's expression. Before he could ask further questions, the orchestra began another waltz. Several couples moved eagerly toward the dance floor beneath swelling music. Lord Pembroke approached with a dramatic bow toward Evelyn. "Your Grace, might I steal one dance from Blackthorne before he becomes entirely possessive?" The Duke answered before Evelyn could. No. Complete silence followed for one awkward second. Lord Pembroke blinked visibly. "Ah, my wife does not look comfortable." His tone remained calm enough to sound polite. Yet no one mistook the dismissal beneath it. Lord Pembroke retreated almost immediately. Amelia stared openly. Evelyn felt heat rush faintly into her cheeks. That was unnecessary. The Duke looked down at her. Was it inaccurate? She opened her mouth to protest, then realized she truly had not wanted to dance. The ballroom suddenly felt suffocating tonight. Too many eyes, too much noise. He had noticed before she herself fully had. Again. "No," she admitted quietly. Something unreadable flickered briefly through his gaze before Lady Margaret interrupted once more. "Your Grace, several gentlemen from Parliament hoped to discuss northern trade routes with you. Then they should schedule a meeting at Blackthorne House." The sharpness beneath his calm voice surprised even Evelyn slightly. Lady Margaret's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course." The Duke turned toward Evelyn instead. "You are pale." I am fine. No, he said quietly enough that only she could hear. You are overwhelmed. Her throat tightened unexpectedly. No one had ever described her feelings with such brutal accuracy before. He offered his arm. Walk with me. Lady Margaret immediately stiffened. Surely the Duke cannot abandon the evening so early. His grey eyes shifted toward her with cold precision. I assure you, Lady Whitmore, my priorities remain very clear. Silence fell around them. Even nearby guests seemed to sense the tension suddenly sharpening beneath the polished conversation. For one dangerous moment, Evelyn thought her mother might actually lose composure publicly. Then the perfect smile returned. Naturally, the Duke escorted Evelyn from the ballroom before anyone could speak further. Cool air greeted them immediately once they stepped onto the enormous terrace overlooking snow-covered gardens below. The sudden quiet felt almost unreal after the overwhelming noise inside. Evelyn inhaled slowly, trying to steady the tightness in her chest. Thank you, she whispered. The Duke rested one hand lightly against the stone railing while watching the ballroom windows behind them. Your mother dislikes when conversations occur beyond her control. Evelyn looked toward him carefully. You noticed that too. A humorless smile touched his mouth briefly. Evelyn, your mother notices every movement within a room before it happens. Snow drifted softly through the darkness around them. The ballroom music sounded distant now. Safer somehow. What are you truly investigating? She asked quietly. He remained silent long enough that she thought he might not answer. Then he said, 3 former Whitmore servants disappeared within the last 4 years. Cold moved sharply through her chest. Disappeared. 1 governess. 2 maids. His gaze remained fixed toward the gardens. Every reference to them ended abruptly. No forwarding addresses. No family contacts. Nothing. Evelyn wrapped her arms tighter around herself beneath the winter air. That is impossible. No, his voice lowered dangerously. It is deliberate. Fear pressed heavily against her ribs now. Not merely fear of her mother. Fear of truths buried deeply enough that even she never questioned them fully. You think mother harmed them? The Duke looked toward her finally. I think your mother has spent years ensuring silence. The terrace suddenly felt colder than the snow itself. Evelyn stared through the drifting darkness while memories surfaced one by one. Familiar servants disappearing overnight. Explanations given casually at breakfast. She had accepted every story because children learned quickly not to ask dangerous questions. Her voice barely emerged above a whisper. I never wondered where they went. You were taught not to. Pain flickered unexpectedly behind her eyes. That does not make me innocent. The Duke's expression hardened immediately. You were a child. I should have noticed. No, his voice deepened slightly. You should have been protected. The words struck with devastating force. Evelyn looked away quickly before emotion could fully surface across her face. Behind them, ballroom doors opened suddenly. Lady Margaret stepped onto the terrace wrapped in silver fur, her elegant smile already fixed carefully into place. Yet the moment her eyes moved between Evelyn and the Duke, something colder flickered beneath the surface. Calculation. Concern. There you are. Her voice sounded perfectly pleasant. People have begun wondering whether the Duke abducted his own bride. The Duke did not smile. Your daughter required air. Lady Margaret's gaze settled briefly on Evelyn. Evelyn has always been overly sensitive. Has she? The quiet sharpness beneath his reply sliced cleanly through the winter air. Lady Margaret's expression froze almost imperceptibly. I beg your pardon? Your daughter spent the last hour struggling to breathe comfortably inside a crowded ballroom. His eyes never left Lady Margaret's face now. Curious that no one except her husband appeared to notice. Silence crashed heavily across the terrace. Evelyn felt her pulse begin pounding painfully beneath her ribs. Lady Margaret recovered first. You misunderstand her temperament. No, the Duke said softly. I believe I am beginning to understand it very well. For one suspended moment, the two of them simply stared at each other beneath drifting snow and distant ballroom music. society's perfect widow, England's most feared duke. And suddenly Evelyn realized something terrifying. Her mother had finally encountered someone she could not easily manipulate. Lady Margaret smiled again at last, though the warmth no longer reached her eyes. How fortunate my daughter married such a protective man. The Duke's expression remained cold as winter stone. Yes, he said quietly. How fortunate indeed. The morning after the Harrington Gala, snow covered Blackthorne Manor in a quiet blanket of white that softened the sharp edges of the estate and muted the sounds of London beyond its gates. Evelyn stood near the breakfast-room window watching flakes drift slowly across the frozen gardens, while sunlight spilled pale gold across polished floors. For the first time in years, she realized she had slept through an entire night without waking in fear. The realization unsettled her almost as much as comfort itself. "You are smiling." She turned slightly at the Duke's voice behind her. He entered carrying several folded newspapers beneath one arm, dressed in dark charcoal rather than formal black this morning. Without ballroom crowds surrounding him, he looked younger somehow, less untouchable. Evelyn lowered her gaze quickly. "I did not realize I was." It was brief. Something faintly amused flickered through his expression. "But it happened." Heat touched her cheeks lightly. She moved toward the breakfast table while servants quietly arranged tea and fresh bread before withdrawing again. No one hovered anxiously here. No one watched her waiting for mistakes. Even the silence felt different inside Blackthorne Manor. The Duke unfolded one newspaper while she poured tea carefully into delicate porcelain cups. "London appears disappointed we left the gala early." Evelyn glanced toward the headline visible across the paper. "Blackthorne Duke abandons ballroom for mysterious new bride." Her stomach tightened instantly. People always need stories. "Yes." His tone remained calm. "Though I prefer when those stories are inaccurate." She looked toward him carefully. "Are they?" His eyes lifted from the newspaper directly to hers. "That depends." The warmth rushing beneath her skin became deeply inconvenient. She focused instead on adding sugar to her tea despite never taking sugar at all. The Duke noticed immediately. Of course he did. "You dislike sweet tea." Evelyn froze faintly. "How would you know that?" "You leave it untouched whenever servants prepare it." The answer came casually. Yet something intimate settled beneath the observation itself. He paid attention. Constantly. Not to control her. Simply because he noticed everything connected to her now. The realization lingered uncomfortably inside her chest long after breakfast ended. Later that afternoon, Evelyn wandered into the library searching for distraction and found the Duke seated beside the fire reviewing estate documents. Snowlight filtered through towering windows while low flames cast warm gold across shelves lined with leather-bound books. Without looking up, he said, "You walk more quietly when you are anxious." Evelyn paused near the doorway. "Is there anything you do not notice?" "Very little." She almost smiled despite herself. The Duke set aside the papers and gestured toward the chair opposite him. "Come sit before you pace holes into the carpet." "I was not pacing." "You were considering it." Evelyn lowered herself cautiously into the velvet chair beside the fire. A chessboard rested unfinished across the small table between them. Black pieces clearly dominated the game already. "Do you play?" he asked. "Poorly." "Good." She blinked in surprise. "Good. I dislike losing in my own library." A startled laugh escaped her before she could stop it. The sound seemed to surprise both of them equally. Silence followed immediately afterward. Yet unlike before, it no longer felt strained. The Duke studied her quietly across the chessboard. "There it is again." "What?" "That expression." His voice softened slightly. "You look different when you forget to be afraid." Her breath caught softly. The warmth from the fire suddenly felt too close. Too intimate. She reached for a chess piece simply to occupy her hands. "I do not spend all my time afraid." One dark eyebrow lifted. "No, not constantly. Only when doors open unexpectedly, or footsteps approach too quickly, or someone raises their voice." He said it calmly, not cruelly. The accuracy still pierced straight through her defenses. Evelyn stared down at the chessboard. You make me sound fragile. No, his voice deepened slightly. I think someone taught you to survive by anticipating danger. She moved the wrong chess piece entirely. The Duke noticed but did not correct her. You speak about fear as though it is simple to abandon. I know it is not. She looked up then. Something in his expression stopped her breathing briefly. Not pity. Never pity. Understanding perhaps. Or anger carefully restrained beneath composure. How? She asked quietly. For a moment he remained silent. Snow drifted beyond the windows while firelight moved softly across the severe lines of his face. War teaches certain lessons permanently, he said at last. You learn very quickly which sounds mean safety and which do not. Evelyn felt unexpected sadness stir quietly through her chest. She had heard stories of battlefields and military campaigns, but hearing him speak so plainly about it made those stories suddenly human. I am sorry, she whispered. His gaze held hers steadily. Do not apologize for things you did not cause. The words landed deeper than he probably intended. Evelyn looked away first. Over the following week, an unfamiliar rhythm slowly settled between them. Not romance exactly. Something quieter. More dangerous. Safety. The Duke rarely spent entire days at Blackthorne Manor due to endless meetings involving factories, shipping routes, and political negotiations. Yet somehow Evelyn always knew when he had returned even before servants announced him. The atmosphere shifted subtly around the house itself. One snowy afternoon, she sat reading near the conservatory windows when a footman entered carrying correspondence. A letter from Lady Amelia Whitmore, Your Grace. Relief brightened through her immediately. She accepted the letter quickly and broke the seal. Amelia's familiar handwriting spilled across the page in hurried lines. Evelyn, Mother has become increasingly agitated since the Harrington Gala. She dismissed another maid yesterday after accusing her of gossiping to outsiders. Several servants appear frightened. I am frightened too. Please write soon. Evelyn's fingers tightened around the paper. The Duke entered the conservatory moments later, removing dark leather gloves as winter air followed him briefly inside. He noticed her expression immediately. Amelia? Evelyn handed him the letter without speaking. He read silently beside the windows while snow fell steadily outside. By the time he finished, cold fury had settled visibly across his face. How long has your sister been alone with her? Most of her life. He folded the letter carefully. Too carefully. That ends soon. Fear moved instantly through Evelyn's chest. You cannot simply remove Amelia from Whitmore Manor. Watch me. She rose too quickly from the chair. You do not understand. Mother controls everything around her. Not anymore. His voice remained calm. Somehow that calmness felt more dangerous than shouting ever could. Evelyn wrapped her arms tightly around herself. You underestimate her. No, gray eyes fixed steadily upon her. I believe you spent years underestimating how much power she actually possesses because surviving required it. Silence filled the conservatory. He was right again. The realization exhausted her. That evening, the Duke canceled 2 dinner engagements and remained at the manor instead. Evelyn found him unexpectedly in the music room after supper, standing beside the piano beneath soft candlelight. Do you play? He asked when she entered. A little. That means yes. She hesitated before crossing toward the piano bench. The polished ivory keys gleamed softly beneath the chandeliers overhead. Evelyn had not played comfortably in years. At Whitmore Manor, mistakes during practice often carried consequences she preferred not remembering. Her fingers hovered uncertainly above the keys. The Duke noticed immediately. No audience tonight, he said quietly. Only me, which somehow felt far more intimidating. Yet she began playing anyway. Soft notes drifted gradually through the enormous room. Simple at first, careful, then slowly steadier as memory returned beneath her fingertips. The Duke remained near the fireplace listening without interruption. When she finally stopped several minutes later, silence settled warmly through the room. You learned professionally, he observed. Evelyn stared down at the piano keys. My father insisted. You miss him. The ache inside her chest arrived instantly, sharp even after all these years. Yes. She expected the conversation to end there. Instead, the Duke crossed quietly toward the piano and rested one hand lightly against the polished wood beside her. Tell me something about him. The request startled her. People rarely asked about her father anymore. Lady Margaret especially discouraged it. Evelyn looked down at her hands resting motionless across the keys. He used to bring me books from his travels. A faint smile touched her mouth despite herself. Mother hated when he encouraged questions at dinner. Why? Because he listened to my answers. The Duke said nothing, yet she could feel his attention sharpen further. After he died, she continued softly, the house became quieter, not peaceful quiet, empty quiet, the kind where everyone listens for moods shifting behind closed doors. Amelia was still very young then. I tried to protect her from most of it. And who protected you? The question slipped gently into the silence between them. Evelyn could not answer, because there had never been anyone. The realization sat heavily in the room itself. The Duke's jaw tightened visibly. He reached toward the piano then and closed the lid softly over the keys. Enough for tonight. She looked up in confusion. I can continue. No, his voice lowered slightly. You look tired. There it was again. That impossible awareness of her emotional limits before she reached them herself. Evelyn rose slowly from the bench. Suddenly the room felt very small beneath candlelight and shadows. Why are you doing this? She asked quietly. Doing what? Caring. The word escaped more vulnerable than intended. The Duke held her gaze for a long moment. Because someone should have a long time ago. Emotion crashed unexpectedly through her chest hard enough to hurt. Evelyn stepped backward instinctively. Not away from him exactly. Away from the unbearable tenderness hidden inside those words. The Duke noticed the retreat immediately. Yet instead of moving closer, he stepped aside to give her space. Always space. Always choice. It dismantled her defenses more effectively than force ever could. She left the music room moments later with her heartbeat painfully uneven. That night, sometime after midnight, Evelyn woke suddenly from a nightmare she could not fully remember. Darkness filled the unfamiliar bedroom while winter wind rattled faintly against the windows. For one disoriented moment, panic swallowed her entirely. She thought she was still at Whitmore Manor. Thought footsteps would arrive any second outside her door. Thought morning would bring another day of careful silence and fear. Before she fully woke, the words escaped instinctively into the darkness. Please don't let her take me back. Silence followed. Then realization crashed through her all at once. She was not alone. Near the fireplace, the Duke looked up sharply from the armchair where he had apparently fallen asleep while reviewing documents. Candlelight flickered softly across his exhausted face. Evelyn froze in horror. Your Grace, He stood immediately, concern replacing fatigue in an instant. You were dreaming. Heat and humiliation rushed painfully through her chest. She pushed herself upright too quickly against the pillows. I apologize. I did not mean... Stop apologizing. His voice softened immediately afterward. You have nothing to apologize for. Evelyn looked away because tears threatened unexpectedly behind her eyes. Mortifying. Weak. I thought I was still there. Silence settled quietly through the room. Then she felt the mattress shift slightly as the Duke sat carefully at the edge of the bed, leaving enough distance not to frighten her further. You are not there anymore, he said quietly. The certainty in his voice broke something fragile inside her. Evelyn pressed trembling fingers against her mouth, fighting desperately for composure. The Duke remained perfectly still beside her. No pressure, no demands, just steady presence in the darkness. She cannot reach you here, he continued softly. I give you my word. Tears slipped free anyway. Silent, exhausted tears she had spent years refusing herself. The Duke did not pretend not to notice. He simply remained beside her while the storm inside her chest slowly quieted for the first time in longer than she could remember. For days after the nightmare, a sealed package arrived at Blackthorne Manor shortly before dusk. Snow still covered the gardens beyond the estate walls, though weak sunlight had begun melting the edges into silver streams along the stone pathways. Evelyn sat near the library fire reviewing correspondence when the butler entered carrying a small wooden box wrapped carefully in dark cloth. "A messenger delivered this privately for your grace," he announced. Evelyn frowned slightly. "From whom?" The boy refused to say. Something uneasy moved through her chest immediately. The box itself appeared ordinary enough, though the seal pressed into dark wax made her heartbeat quicken painfully. A tiny pressed lily. Amelia's seal. Evelyn rose so quickly her chair scraped softly against the floor. "Thank you." The butler bowed and withdrew silently. Her fingers trembled faintly while breaking the seal. Inside rested several folded papers tied together with faded blue ribbon and a smaller envelope bearing Amelia's hurried handwriting. Evelyn unfolded the note first. "Evelyn, I found these hidden inside Father's old study wall after Mother ordered renovations upstairs. I do not believe she knows they still exist. Please do not write back about this. I think someone has been searching my room." The final line made cold fear settle sharply beneath Evelyn's ribs. The library doors opened before she could fully process the note. The Duke entered removing dark gloves dusted lightly with snow. One glance at her expression changed his immediately. "What happened?" Evelyn handed him Amelia's letter silently. He read it once, then again slower. By the time he finished, the room itself seemed colder. "Where are the rest?" Evelyn untied the ribbon around the remaining papers with careful fingers. Several yellow documents slid free across the desk surface. Financial records, letters, fragments of journal pages written in her father's familiar hand. For one suspended moment, she forgot how to breathe. The Duke moved beside her immediately. "Evelyn." She reached shakily toward the nearest page. Her father's handwriting blurred slightly before her eyes. January 3, 1848. "Margaret insists Evelyn requires stricter discipline. I fear she mistakes obedience for virtue." The room fell completely silent except for the fire crackling softly nearby. Evelyn swallowed hard and reached for another page. "If anything should happen to me, someone must know the child is not unstable. She is frightened. There is a difference." Her hands began trembling visibly now. The Duke stepped closer without touching her. "Sit down." She barely heard him. Another journal page slid free beneath her fingers. Margaret consulted Dr. Bennett again regarding treatment facilities outside London. She believes Evelyn's emotional disposition may become embarrassing if not controlled early. Cold panic crashed violently through Evelyn's chest. "Treatment facilities?" Her voice barely emerged above a whisper. The Duke took the page from her gently, eyes hardening as he scanned the lines. "Asylums," he said quietly. Everything inside her seemed to stop. The library blurred faintly around the edges. "No," the word escaped automatically. "No, Mother would never." Then memory surfaced all at once. Age 14. Locked drawing room doors. Her mother speaking quietly with a physician while Evelyn stood trembling near the fireplace after crying publicly at a funeral reception. Hysterical tendencies. Excessive sensitivity. Isolation may improve emotional discipline. She stumbled backward one step before the Duke caught her elbow steadily. "Easy." Evelyn could barely hear him over the sudden roaring inside her head. "She wanted to send me away. Evelyn. She wanted people to believe I was unstable." Tears burned sharply behind her eyes now. "Dear God." The Duke guided her carefully toward the chair beside the fire. This time she did not resist. He crouched beside her while she pressed shaking fingers against her mouth, trying desperately to breathe normally. "Look at me." His voice remained calm, grounded. "Breathe slowly." She obeyed automatically because she could not seem to do anything else. The Duke waited until the panic eased slightly before rising again to examine the remaining documents spread across the desk. Silence stretched heavily through the library while snow drifted outside the windows. Then his expression changed. colder, more dangerous. Evelyn. She looked up slowly. He held one folded letter already opened. This was addressed to Dr. Bennet. Her stomach tightened instantly. "Read it," he said quietly. She took the page with numb fingers. The words swam briefly before settling into horrifying clarity. "Dr. Bennet, I believe stronger intervention may soon become necessary regarding my eldest daughter. Her emotional instability worsens with age, and she increasingly displays manipulative tendencies toward household staff. If discretion can be guaranteed, I wish to discuss permanent residential treatment before the next social season. Lady Margaret Whitmore." Evelyn stared at the signature until the letters blurred completely. Permanent residential treatment. The words hollowed something deep inside her chest. "I was 14, she whispered. The Duke remained motionless beside the desk. Fury radiated through his silence so powerfully the entire room seemed to feel it. Yet when he finally spoke, his voice stayed terrifyingly controlled. "You were a child." Evelyn looked down at the letter again. Suddenly, countless moments from her past rearranged themselves into horrifying clarity. The physicians her mother invited repeatedly after emotional incidents. The endless comments about composure and proper behavior. The threats delivered softly whenever Evelyn cried too visibly in public. "People will think something is wrong with you. No one marries unstable women." "She wanted everyone to believe I was mad," Evelyn said quietly. "Not difficult. Easier to control." The Duke's jaw tightened sharply. "No," he crossed toward the fireplace now with dangerous stillness in every movement. "She wanted silence." Evelyn pressed trembling hands together in her lap. "If father had died sooner—" She could not finish the sentence. She did not need to. The Duke understood anyway. The realization settled visibly across his expression like winter frost. He turned back toward the desk and continued examining the documents carefully. More records surfaced gradually beneath his hands. Estate withdrawals hidden through false accounts. Payments made to dismissed servants immediately before they disappeared from Whitmore Manor employment. Letters from physicians discussing Evelyn's fragile disposition, in language cold enough to make her nauseous. "This goes beyond cruelty," the Duke said quietly. "Your mother constructed an entire narrative around you." Evelyn stared into the fire without truly seeing it. "I believed her sometimes." The admission slipped out before she could stop it. Shame followed instantly afterward. The Duke looked toward her sharply. "What?" She wrapped her arms tightly around herself. "When someone repeats long enough that you are too emotional, too difficult, too weak," her throat tightened painfully. "Eventually you begin wondering if they are right." Silence crashed heavily through the library. Then the Duke crossed toward her again. Not rushed. Never rushed. He stopped directly before her chair. "Evelyn." She forced herself to meet his eyes. Gray. Steady. Furious on her behalf in ways she still did not fully understand. "Nothing about your survival was weakness." Emotion struck so sharply through her chest she looked away immediately. The Duke exhaled slowly before kneeling beside her chair once more. "Listen to me carefully." His voice lowered. "Fear conditioned into someone from childhood is not madness. Hypervigilance is not instability. And grief is not hysteria." Every word seemed to dismantle something poisonous inside her piece by piece. Evelyn blinked rapidly against the tears threatening again. "How can you sound so certain?" Something flickered across his face then. Old anger, perhaps. Old memory. "Because I have seen men return from war behaving exactly as you do." Her breath caught softly. The nightmares. The anticipation of danger. The inability to rest fully. His jaw tightened slightly. No physician called them insane. They called them wounded. The room fell silent again. Evelyn stared at him through the firelight while something fragile and painful shifted quietly inside her chest. No one had ever framed her fear as injury before. Only failure. The Duke rose slowly and returned toward the desk. "There is more." His voice cooled instantly again. "Much more." He unfolded another document while Evelyn forced herself upright despite exhaustion pressing heavily through her body now. "What is it?" A property transfer request. His expression darkened further. Prepared but never finalized. Evelyn crossed slowly toward him. The page listed the name of a private treatment estate several hours outside London. Her own name appeared beneath the transfer authorization line. Proposed duration: indefinite. She stopped breathing for one terrible second. She truly meant to send me away. Yes. The Duke folded the paper carefully. Too carefully. And your father discovered it before completion. Evelyn looked toward the journal pages again. That is why he hid these. He knew someone might need proof eventually. The realization hurt almost as badly as the documents themselves. Her father had tried to protect her even after death. Somehow he had known. A sharp knock interrupted the silence suddenly. Both of them looked toward the library door instantly. The butler entered with unusual tension visible beneath his professionalism. Your Grace. What is it? A messenger has arrived from Whitmore Manor. Cold settled immediately through Evelyn's chest. The butler hesitated briefly before continuing. Miss Amelia Whitmore has disappeared. Silence exploded through the room. Evelyn felt the blood drain instantly from her face. What? The butler swallowed carefully. According to the messenger, Miss Amelia left the estate shortly after dawn. Lady Whitmore claims she may have become emotionally distressed. The Duke went completely still. Terrifyingly still. Claims? Yes, Your Grace. Evelyn's heartbeat thundered violently now. Amelia would never leave without explanation. Never. Not after sending the package. Panic surged sharply through her chest. Mother knows. The Duke's eyes snapped toward her immediately. What? She knows Amelia found the documents. Fear turned her voice thin. Dear God, she knows. The Duke crossed toward the door, already reaching for his coat. Prepare the carriage immediately. The butler vanished without another word. Evelyn moved toward the desk, gathering the papers with shaking hands. If Mother believes Amelia spoke to us... She could not finish the sentence. The Duke stepped directly in front of her. Listen carefully. His voice had become cold enough to freeze the room itself. No one is disappearing again. For the first time since meeting him, Evelyn fully understood why powerful men feared Duke Adrian Blackthorne. Because beneath all his restraint lived something relentless, once angered. And now her mother had endangered the only person Evelyn loved enough to break completely for. The carriage wheels cut sharply through frozen London streets beneath a sky darkening toward snow again. Evelyn sat rigid beside the Duke inside the Blackthorne carriage while fear pressed harder against her chest with every passing block. Across from them, the packet of Amelia's documents rested beneath the Duke's gloved hand like evidence awaiting judgment. Neither of them had spoken for nearly 15 minutes. The silence itself felt dangerous now. Finally, Evelyn whispered, "She would not run away." The Duke's gaze remained fixed beyond the frosted carriage window. "I know. Amelia hates conflict." Her voice tightened painfully. If she left Whitmore Manor willingly, something terrified her first. The Duke turned toward her then. Calm. Controlled. Terrifyingly focused. "I have already sent men to every station, inn and private road leading north from London." Evelyn stared at him. "How?" "Before we left the manor." He reached inside his coat and withdrew a folded note already sealed with black wax. "I anticipated this possibility the moment your butler said Lady Whitmore described Amelia as emotionally distressed." Cold moved sharply through Evelyn's stomach. The exact same language. The same phrases her mother had once used against her. "She is doing it again," Evelyn whispered. "Mother is building another story." The Duke's expression darkened visibly. "Yes." The carriage stopped abruptly outside Whitmore Manor moments later. Even before the footman opened the door, Evelyn sensed the tension surrounding the estate. Lights blazed behind every window despite the late hour. Servants moved quickly through the entrance hall. Fear hung inside the house itself like smoke. Lady Margaret waited in the drawing room dressed impeccably in dark burgundy silk, as though hosting an ordinary social evening rather than responding to a missing daughter. Only the stiffness in her posture betrayed strain beneath the polished exterior. Your Grace. Her eyes moved immediately toward Evelyn. Darling, thank heavens you arrived. The performance made Evelyn suddenly nauseous. The Duke did not bother with formalities. Where is Amelia? Lady Margaret pressed one hand lightly against her chest. We do not know. When did she leave? Some time before dawn. Her voice trembled with carefully measured concern. The servants discovered her room empty this morning. The Duke removed his gloves slowly, deliberately, and you waited until evening to contact Blackthorne Manor. Lady Margaret's expression tightened almost invisibly. I hoped she would return quietly before causing unnecessary scandal. Your daughter is missing. His voice cooled another degree. That exceeds scandal. Evelyn moved toward Amelia's usual chair near the fireplace. Empty now. A half-finished embroidery hoop still rested beside the table exactly where Amelia must have left it. The sight twisted painfully through her chest. Did she leave any letter? Lady Margaret hesitated too briefly. The Duke noticed immediately. Lady Whitmore. There was a note. She reached toward the desk drawer reluctantly and withdrew a folded page. But it made very little sense. The Duke accepted the letter before Evelyn could reach it. His eyes scanned the contents once, then again slower. Something cold settled visibly across his face. Read it, Evelyn whispered. He handed her the page silently. Mother says everyone eventually believes the calmer voice. If anything happens, please remember I tried to tell the truth. Evelyn's breath caught sharply. The handwriting shook across the page as though Amelia wrote it frightened. This is not a farewell. No, the Duke said quietly. It is a warning. Lady Margaret stepped closer immediately. Your Grace. Amelia has always been imaginative. The Duke's eyes lifted toward her with enough coldness to freeze the room itself. Be very careful what you say next. Silence crashed heavily through the drawing room. Evelyn had never seen anyone speak to her mother that way before. Lady Margaret recovered quickly, though color faded faintly from her face. I merely mean she can become emotional under pressure. Like Evelyn? The question sliced through the room with terrifying precision. Lady Margaret's gaze snapped toward her eldest daughter instantly. What exactly has Evelyn told you? Enough. The Duke stepped between them almost casually. Yet the movement felt deeply intentional. Protective. Your daughter spent years being taught fear inside this house. That is absurd. Is it? His voice remained dangerously calm. Then perhaps you can explain the treatment facility documents. Complete silence followed. Evelyn watched the exact moment panic flickered behind her mother's eyes. Tiny. Nearly invisible. But there. Lady Margaret recovered almost immediately. Those papers were misunderstandings discussed privately with physicians years ago. About institutionalizing a 14-year-old child? The Duke's restraint had become frightening now. Interesting definition of misunderstanding. Evelyn was emotionally unstable after her father died. The words hit Evelyn like ice water. Mother, you had episodes. Lady Margaret turned toward the Duke with polished desperation. Your Grace, my eldest daughter has always possessed an overly sensitive temperament. I did everything possible to protect her reputation. The room tilted faintly around Evelyn. Even now, even confronted directly, her mother still chose the same narrative. Emotional, unstable, difficult. She suddenly understood something horrifying. Lady Margaret truly believed her own lies after repeating them long enough. Protect her. The Duke's voice lowered dangerously. By bruising her wrists hard enough to leave marks beneath wedding gloves? Lady Margaret froze completely. The silence afterward became absolute. Evelyn stopped breathing. She had never told him about the wedding morning bruise, which meant he remembered it himself. Every detail, every reaction. Lady Margaret's composure cracked for one fraction of a second. Your Grace, I do not know what Evelyn has implied. Enough. The single word landed through the room like a blade. Even the servants near the doorway visibly stiffened. The Duke stepped closer now. Not loudly, not dramatically, which somehow made him infinitely more terrifying. You will not speak about your daughter as though she is absent while she stands directly before you. Evelyn felt the air leave her lungs softly. No one had ever defended her publicly before. Not once in her entire life. Lady Margaret's eyes sharpened immediately. I see. Her voice cooled. Evelyn has convinced you I am some sort of monster. No, the Duke's expression remained carved from stone. The documents accomplished that without assistance. Lady Margaret laughed suddenly, sharp and brittle beneath the chandelier light. You are allowing yourself to be manipulated by a frightened girl with a talent for dramatics. The words struck old wounds automatically. Evelyn felt her shoulders tense instinctively. The Duke noticed immediately. His jaw tightened with visible fury. You call trauma dramatics because acknowledging reality would destroy your reflection. Silence exploded through the drawing room. One servant near the door actually looked away. Lady Margaret went pale beneath her powder. Yet when she spoke again, her voice returned eerily calm. Your Grace, I believe my daughter has become confused by grief and isolation. Marriage can overwhelm fragile women. There it was again. The same language from the letters. The same poison wrapped carefully inside concern. Evelyn suddenly realized her mother intended to do exactly what she had always done. Turn every accusation into proof of instability. Make fear itself appear irrational. Stop, Evelyn whispered. Lady Margaret looked toward her almost pityingly. Darling, you are exhausted. Stop speaking about me like I am broken. The room went still. Evelyn rarely raised her voice. Everyone here knew it. Lady Margaret's eyes narrowed immediately. You see? She said softly toward the Duke. Emotional volatility. Something inside Evelyn snapped quietly then. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Years of fear simply reaching exhaustion. No, her voice steadied unexpectedly. You do not get to do this anymore. Even Lady Margaret looked momentarily startled. Evelyn stepped forward despite her pulse pounding violently beneath her ribs. Amelia disappeared because she was frightened of you. How dare you? You told physicians I was unstable because I cried after father died. Her throat tightened painfully, but she forced herself onward. You threatened servants until they stopped speaking to me directly. You made me apologize for existing too loudly inside my own home. Evelyn. Her mother's voice sharpened dangerously. You are humiliating yourself. No tears burned behind Evelyn's eyes now, but she did not look away. You spent years humiliating me until I believed I deserved it. Silence consumed the room entirely. The grandfather clock near the hallway seemed unbearably loud suddenly. Lady Margaret stared at her eldest daughter as though seeing someone unfamiliar. Perhaps she was. Because for the first time in her life, Evelyn did not lower her gaze first. The Duke moved beside her then, close enough that warmth brushed faintly against her shoulder. Steady presence without taking control away from her. You should leave, Lady Margaret said coldly. Both of you. Not until Amelia is found. I already told you I do not know where she is. Perhaps. The Duke reached calmly inside his coat and withdrew one of the documents from Amelia's package. But you knew exactly why she was frightened. Lady Margaret's face lost color instantly when she recognized the paper. Her reaction lasted less than a second. Long enough. The Duke saw it too. Interesting, he said softly. You recognized your own signature immediately. The room seemed to contract around them. Lady Margaret looked toward Evelyn again. For the first time, genuine hatred flickered openly beneath her elegant composure. You searched through my private papers. Evelyn felt suddenly cold. No, she said quietly. Father hid them from you. Something dangerous flashed across Lady Margaret's face, then vanished instantly beneath practiced calm. Too late. The Duke had noticed. Every servant in the room had noticed. I think this conversation is finished, he said quietly. Lady Margaret lifted her chin. You cannot threaten me inside my own home. No, his gray eyes became glacial. But I can protect my wife from it. The room fell silent. Completely silent. Even the fire seemed quieter somehow. Because for the first time, someone powerful had chosen Evelyn publicly. Not privately, not behind closed doors. Here, in front of witnesses. The Duke of Blackthorne stood beside her with cold fury in his eyes and made his position unmistakably clear. I believe my wife. No one moved. No one breathed. And across the drawing room, Lady Margaret Whitmore finally looked afraid. Snow began falling again shortly after midnight as Blackthorne carriages crossed silent London streets toward the Duke's estate. Inside the carriage, Evelyn sat motionless beside Adrian while the confrontation at Whitmore Manor replayed endlessly through her mind. I believe my wife. The words still echoed through her chest with painful force. She had spent so many years preparing herself never to expect protection that actually receiving it felt almost unbearable. Across from her, Adrian remained dangerously quiet. His jaw stayed tight beneath shifting lantern light while one gloved hand rested motionless against the carriage door. He had barely spoken since leaving Whitmore Manor. Somehow that silence frightened her more than anger would have. The moment they arrived at Blackthorne Manor, Adrian turned toward the waiting footman before Evelyn could even step fully onto the marble entrance floor. Double the men searching the northern roads. His voice carried cold authority sharp enough to still the entire hall instantly. No one stops until Miss Whitmore is found. Yes, Your Grace. And send word to Captain Holloway immediately. The servant bowed and disappeared at once. Evelyn removed her gloves slowly, while snow melted across the shoulders of her dark cloak. Exhaustion pressed heavily through every part of her body now. Fear. Confrontation. Amelia missing somewhere in the frozen city. It all felt unreal. Adrian turned toward her then. The fury still visible beneath his expression softened almost imperceptibly. You should rest. Evelyn shook her head immediately. I cannot. You have barely eaten today. Neither have you. A flicker of something crossed his face briefly. Frustration, perhaps, or concern hidden beneath it. Evelyn. His voice lowered. You are shaking. Only then did she notice the faint tremor moving through her hands. She pressed them together instinctively. I am fine. Adrian stepped closer. No, the word came quietly, firmly. You are frightened for your sister. Emotion tightened painfully behind her ribs. What if Mother found the documents before Amelia escaped? Then she would have destroyed them, not allowed them to reach us. He removed his gloves slowly, eyes never leaving hers. Your sister was clever enough to send proof first. Evelyn tried to hold onto the reassurance. Yet panic still lingered beneath her skin like ice water. Adrian noticed immediately. Of course he did. He noticed everything. Come with me, he said quietly. He led her not toward the formal drawing rooms but toward the private study adjoining his office. Firelight already glowed warmly inside, casting gold across dark shelves lined with maps and legal documents. The room smelled faintly of cedar and old paper. Safe, quiet. Adrian poured brandy into a crystal glass before offering it toward her. Evelyn hesitated. I rarely drink. Tonight qualifies as an exception. She accepted the glass carefully, though the warmth spreading through her fingers mattered more than the drink itself. Adrian remained standing near the fire watching snow strike softly against the windows. Your mother made a mistake tonight. Evelyn looked up slowly. Confronting you publicly? Underestimating you publicly. His voice cooled slightly. Predators rely on silence. Once witnesses begin noticing patterns, fear loses effectiveness. Evelyn stared down into the amber liquid swirling faintly inside the glass. I did not feel brave. Adrian's gaze settled on her immediately. Bravery is not the absence of fear. The words landed softly between them. Too sincere. Too direct. Evelyn looked away before emotion could rise visibly across her face again. You speak as though you understand fear very well. Silence followed. Then Adrian crossed slowly toward the desk and opened one of the lower drawers. He withdrew a weathered military file bound with dark leather before placing it carefully on the desk surface. When I was 26, he said quietly, my regiment lost 32 men in one winter campaign. Evelyn looked toward him cautiously. Adrian's expression had become distant somehow, controlled too tightly. We were trapped in freezing rain for nearly 4 days before reinforcements arrived. He loosened the leather strap around the file but did not open it. One of the younger officers suffered panic attacks afterward. Nightmares. Hypervigilance. He startled every time doors opened unexpectedly. Evelyn's breath caught softly. Adrian continued staring at the untouched file. The army physicians called him weak. Something cold flickered through his eyes then. I watched stronger men die because they ignored fear entirely. The room fell silent except for the fire cracking softly nearby. Evelyn realized suddenly that this was the most personal thing he had ever shared with her. "What happened to the officer?" she asked quietly. Adrian finally looked toward her. "He survived." His jaw tightened slightly, but only after someone convinced him survival did not make him shameful. Emotion moved painfully through Evelyn's chest. "You are speaking about yourself." He did not answer immediately. That alone was answer enough. Snow rattled gently against the windows while silence settled warm and heavy through the study. Evelyn stepped closer without fully realizing she had moved. "I am sorry," she whispered. Adrian's gaze lifted slowly toward hers. "Do not pity me." "I do not." The honesty in her voice surprised them both. Something shifted between them then. Quiet. Dangerous. Not rescue anymore. Recognition, perhaps. Two people carrying different forms of survival inside the same silence. A sharp knock interrupted the moment abruptly. Adrian's expression hardened instantly back into controlled authority. "Enter." Captain Holloway stepped inside, still wearing snow-covered boots and military coat. "Your Grace." His eyes moved briefly toward Evelyn before returning to Adrian. "We found the driver." Every muscle in Evelyn's body tightened at once. "What driver?" Adrian's voice turned glacial. "The carriage hired near Whitmore Manor this morning." Captain Holloway removed a folded paper from his coat. According to the stable records, a young woman matching Miss Amelia's description requested transport toward the southern train station shortly after dawn. Relief crashed through Evelyn so quickly her knees nearly weakened. "She was alone?" "Yes, Your Grace." The captain hesitated slightly, but frightened. Adrian stepped forward immediately. "Where is she now?" The driver left her at a boarding house near Kensington. Hope surged sharply through Evelyn's chest. "Then she is safe." Captain Holloway's expression shifted. Not enough to hide it from Adrian. "What?" Adrian demanded quietly. She stayed there less than an hour before another woman arrived asking questions. Cold returned instantly. Evelyn gripped the edge of the desk. "Mother found her." "Possibly." Holloway continued carefully. The boarding house owner said Miss Amelia appeared terrified after recognizing the visitor. She left through the rear alley before anyone could stop her. Silence crashed through the study. Adrian's entire posture went rigid. "Did the owner identify the woman?" "No, Your Grace." "But..." Holloway hesitated again. A second witness claimed the woman carried correspondence sealed with the Whitmore crest. Evelyn felt panic claw sharply through her chest once more. Amelia was running. Alone. Frightened. Because Lady Margaret had found her first. Adrian turned toward Holloway immediately. "Expand the search radius another 15 miles. "Already done." "And quietly question every former Whitmore servant we have located so far." His eyes darkened dangerously. "I want names, dates, and every physician who ever entered that house." "Yes, Your Grace." The captain departed moments later, leaving silence heavy behind him. Evelyn pressed trembling fingers against her temple. Exhaustion and fear twisted together painfully now. "This is my fault." Adrian looked toward her sharply. "No. If Amelia had never sent the documents, then she would still be trapped inside that house believing no one could help her." His voice deepened slightly. "Do not confuse cause with blame." Evelyn closed her eyes briefly. "You sound so certain all the time." Adrian exhaled slowly through his nose. No, his gaze rested steadily upon her. "I simply learned long ago that hesitation gives cruel people time to hide evidence." The cold fury beneath the sentence chilled the room itself. Evelyn looked toward him carefully. "You truly hate my mother." Something dangerous flickered behind his eyes. Your mother spent years convincing a child she deserved fear. His voice lowered another degree. I reserve hatred for people who weaponize vulnerability. Emotion struck hard enough to ache beneath Evelyn's ribs. Before she could stop herself, tears rose suddenly again. Not dramatic, not loud. Simply exhaustion finally breaking through everything she had tried holding upright all evening. Adrian noticed instantly. His expression changed immediately from fury to concern. Evelyn. She turned away quickly. I am sorry. Do not apologize for crying. His footsteps crossed the room slowly, careful enough not to startle her. Look at me. She could not. Not immediately. The tears embarrassed her too deeply. Then warm fingers touched her wrist gently. Barely there. Offering rather than demanding. Evelyn looked up at last. Adrian stood directly before her now, close enough that she could see exhaustion beneath his own carefully controlled expression. Your sister is alive, he said quietly. And she knows where to run because she learned survival from you. The words broke something inside her completely. Evelyn covered her face with trembling hands as silent tears finally escaped in earnest. She expected embarrassment, weakness, shame. Instead, Adrian simply pulled her carefully against him. One steady arm around her shoulders. No urgency, no pressure, just warmth and impossible safety. Evelyn froze at first from sheer disbelief. Then slowly, painfully slowly, she let herself lean into him. The fire crackled softly nearby while snow fell endlessly beyond the windows. Adrian held her with the same controlled steadiness he brought to everything else in his life. Yet beneath that control, she could feel the anger still burning toward anyone who had ever taught her fear. I have you, he murmured quietly against her hair. The tenderness inside those words nearly undid her entirely. Evelyn closed her eyes and cried for the first time in years without trying to hide the sound. And Adrian Blackthorne never once let go. By the following afternoon, rumors had already begun spreading through London with the speed of wildfire moving across dry fields. Aristocratic households whispered behind closed doors. Servants carried fragments of gossip between kitchens and carriage houses. Society papers hinted vaguely at private tensions surrounding the new Duchess of Blackthorne and her distinguished family. No one knew the full truth yet, but they sensed scandal approaching. Inside Blackthorne Manor, the atmosphere had become sharply focused, controlled, warlike. Evelyn sat beside the library fire wrapped in a dark green shawl while Adrian met privately with lawyers, investigators, and former household staff throughout the day. The estate no longer felt merely like a home. It felt like preparation. Shortly after noon, the library doors opened and Captain Holloway entered accompanied by an older woman in a plain gray dress. The moment Evelyn saw her face, recognition struck instantly. Mrs. Aldrich. The former Whitmore housekeeper looked older than Evelyn remembered, more tired, yet her eyes softened immediately at the sight of her. Miss Evelyn. Emotion tightened unexpectedly in Evelyn's throat. Mrs. Aldrich had worked at Whitmore Manor for nearly 15 years before disappearing suddenly 2 winters earlier. Lady Margaret claimed she retired due to illness. I thought you moved to Scotland, Evelyn whispered. A bitter sadness crossed the woman's expression. That is what your mother preferred people believe. Adrian stepped quietly toward the fireplace while Holloway closed the library doors behind them. Mrs. Aldrich agreed to provide testimony, Adrian said calmly. The housekeeper looked visibly nervous despite her effort to remain composed. Your Grace promised my words would remain protected. They will. Adrian's voice carried absolute certainty. No one touches witnesses under my authority. Evelyn watched the older woman carefully. Why did you leave? Mrs. Aldrich lowered her eyes. Because I stayed too long already. Silence settled heavily through the room. Then slowly, cautiously, the truth began unfolding piece by piece. Your mother dismissed 6 servants over the years for showing you kindness, Mrs. Aldrich said quietly. 2 maids were sent away after they questioned bruises on your arms when you were younger. Evelyn felt her chest tighten painfully. She barely remembered those incidents now. Only fragments remained. frightened whispers, empty servant rooms afterward. Adrian remained very still beside the fire. Too still. "Did Lady Whitmore ever strike Miss Whitmore in front of staff?" he asked. Mrs. Aldrich hesitated visibly. Fear still lingered there even after years away from Whitmore Manor. "Yes." The single word shattered something fragile inside Evelyn despite already knowing the answer. Adrian's jaw tightened sharply. "How often?" "Not constantly." The housekeeper swallowed hard. "Which almost made it worse. Your mother preferred unpredictability. Miss Evelyn never knew which small mistake might become unacceptable." Evelyn wrapped her arms tighter around herself instinctively. Mrs. Aldrich continued quietly, eyes filled with regret. "After your father died, things became much colder inside that house." Adrian's voice lowered dangerously. "Explain." The older woman looked toward Evelyn first, apology flickering across her expression. "Your mother blamed you for reminding her of him." Pain moved sharply beneath Evelyn's ribs. Even hearing it spoken aloud still hurt. "She hated how much he adored you," Mrs. Aldrich whispered, "especially because you resembled him more every year." Silence swallowed the room. Adrian stared into the fire with an expression Evelyn could no longer fully read. Fury lived there now almost constantly beneath his restraint. "There is more," Mrs. Aldrich said softly. "When Miss Evelyn was 14, Lady Whitmore summoned Dr. Bennet after a charity dinner. Evelyn went cold instantly. The treatment letters, the asylum papers. Adrian's eyes lifted sharply toward the housekeeper. "What happened?" Mrs. Aldrich twisted trembling fingers together. Miss Evelyn became overwhelmed during the reception after several guests discussed Lord Whitmore's death. She cried publicly for a few minutes. Shame rushed automatically through Evelyn despite the years separating her from that night. "Your mother locked her upstairs afterward," Mrs. Aldrich continued quietly. "Then she spent nearly an hour speaking privately with Dr. Bennet about institutional treatment." Adrian's control visibly fractured for one terrifying second. "For grief." His voice had gone dangerously soft. "Your mother described it as emotional instability." The library fell completely silent. Even the fire seemed quieter somehow. Evelyn stared down at her hands, unable to speak. 14 years old, mourning her father, and Lady Margaret had responded by discussing whether to hide her away permanently. Adrian turned slowly toward the windows, one hand tightening against the mantel hard enough for his knuckles to pale beneath the firelight. "Did anyone object?" he asked finally. Mrs. Aldrich looked ashamed. "The governess tried." "What was her name?" "Miss Beatrice Holloway." Captain Holloway looked up immediately from beside the door. "Any relation?" "My father's cousin," the older woman admitted softly. "She left Whitmore Manor shortly afterward." Adrian turned sharply. "Left?" Mrs. Aldrich's expression darkened. "No one truly knows. One morning her room was empty. Lady Whitmore claimed she accepted another position in Bath." Cold settled heavily through the library. Evelyn looked toward Adrian instinctively. He already understood exactly what she did. Another disappearance. Another witness erased quietly from the story. A sharp knock interrupted the silence. The butler entered with visible urgency. "Your Grace." Adrian straightened immediately. "What is it?" "Miss Amelia Whitmore has arrived." Evelyn surged to her feet so quickly the chair nearly toppled behind her. "Amelia?" The next moment, her younger sister appeared in the doorway wrapped in a dark traveling cloak dusted with snow. Pale, exhausted, alive. Evelyn crossed the room before Amelia could even speak and pulled her tightly into her arms. Relief crashed through her so violently it almost hurt. "Dear God!" Amelia clung to her immediately. "I am sorry." "No," Evelyn's voice shook. "Do not apologize." Amelia looked exhausted beyond words. Dark circles shadowed beneath her eyes and her hands trembled visibly from cold and fear. Adrian moved toward the doorway at once. "Food, hot tea, and a physician." "I do not need a physician," Amelia protested weakly. "You have been running through winter streets for 2 days," Adrian replied calmly. "Humor me." Something about his tone made even Amelia obey without argument. An hour later, after food and warmth had returned some color to her face, Amelia sat wrapped in blankets beside the library fire while the rest of them listened in horrified silence. "Mother discovered my room had been searched the morning after I sent the package," Amelia said quietly. "She asked whether I found anything unusual during renovations." Evelyn reached for her sister's hand immediately. Amelia gripped it tightly. "I lied," she continued. "But that evening I overheard her speaking with Mr. Graves in Father's office." Adrian's eyes narrowed. "The estate solicitor?" "Yes." Amelia swallowed hard. "Mother said if Evelyn continued spreading delusions, stronger intervention might become necessary again." The room went completely still. Evelyn felt the blood drain slowly from her face. Again. Even now, Lady Margaret still intended to use the same accusation. Instability, delusion, emotional weakness. Adrian's voice turned glacial. "Did she mention Blackthorne Manor specifically?" Amelia nodded faintly. "She said grief sometimes worsens after marriage." Evelyn closed her eyes briefly. The trap became horrifyingly clear now. If Lady Margaret could convince enough people the Duchess of Blackthorne suffered emotional instability, every accusation against her mother would appear unreliable. Worse, hysterical. Amelia looked toward Adrian with visible fear. "She has already begun speaking privately with several society women and physicians." Fury flashed across Adrian's face hard enough to darken the entire room. "She is constructing witnesses." "Yes." Amelia's voice trembled slightly. "And there is something else." Silence settled immediately. Amelia looked toward Evelyn first, tears gathering in her eyes. "When you were 14, Mother told me never to enter the West Corridor because you were dangerous when upset." Evelyn froze completely. Amelia's expression crumpled with guilt. "I believed her for years." The confession pierced straight through Evelyn's chest. Not because she blamed Amelia, because she suddenly understood how thoroughly Lady Margaret poisoned everyone around them, even children. Amelia's tears slipped free now. "I thought you hated me sometimes because you stayed away." "No." Evelyn crossed quickly toward her sister and knelt beside the chair. "Never." Amelia shook her head desperately. "Mother said you needed distance because emotional people become unpredictable." Adrian turned away sharply toward the windows. His restraint had become frightening again. "She isolated you intentionally," Amelia whispered toward Evelyn. "She made everyone afraid of upsetting her version of you." Tears blurred Evelyn's vision unexpectedly. Years. So many years wasted believing she herself was the problem. Amelia grasped her hands tightly. "But I know the truth now." Silence filled the room softly. Then Amelia reached into her traveling bag and withdrew one final folded paper. "There is one more thing Father hid." Adrian took the document carefully while Evelyn watched confusion tighten across his expression. "What is it?" Evelyn asked quietly. Adrian read the page once. Then his entire posture went rigid. "Adrian." He looked toward her slowly. Fury and disbelief collided visibly behind his eyes now. "Your father documented an injury." Cold spread instantly through Evelyn's stomach. "What kind of injury?" Adrian's jaw tightened hard enough to ache. "A fractured rib." Silence exploded through the room. Evelyn stared at him blankly. "No." Amelia covered her mouth sharply with trembling fingers. Adrian unfolded the paper fully now. "Dr. Bennett examined you privately at age 14 after what he described as severe disciplinary force resulting in respiratory pain and bruising." Evelyn stopped breathing. Fragments surfaced suddenly through memory. Weeks unable to sleep comfortably. Mrs. Aldridge helping her dress because lifting her arms hurt too much. Her mother claiming she had fallen down staircase steps. "I remember," she whispered faintly. Adrian looked physically ill with fury now. "Your father demanded legal separation according to this statement." "What?" Amelia gasped softly. Adrian's eyes never left the document. Lady Whitmore threatened public scandal and institutional claims against Evelyn if he pursued it formally. The room tilted faintly around Evelyn. Her father had tried. He truly had tried to save her. Tears slid silently down her face before she even realized she was crying again. Adrian lowered the paper slowly, his expression colder than she had ever seen it. "This ends now," he said quietly. And for the first time since discovering the truth, Evelyn believed him completely. London society gathered at Ashbourne Hall beneath a blaze of crystal chandeliers and candlelight bright enough to turn every polished surface gold. The annual Winter Assembly had always been one of the season's grandest events. Politicians mingled beside aristocrats. Wealthy families displayed daughters in silk and diamonds beneath orchestral music. Gossip moved through the ballroom faster than champagne. Yet tonight, tension lingered beneath the elegance like the sharp edge of a blade hidden inside velvet, because everyone knew something was coming. Evelyn stood at the top of the marble staircase beside Adrian, while hundreds of eyes turned toward them the moment their names were announced. Duchess and Duke of Blackthorne. The title still startled her sometimes. Tonight it felt heavier than usual. Adrian stood beside her dressed entirely in black formal attire severe enough to command silence without effort. One gloved hand rested lightly against the small of her back. Steady. Grounding. Below them, conversations slowed into whispers almost instantly. Evelyn could feel it. Curiosity. Speculation. Hunger for scandal. Across the ballroom, Lady Margaret Whitmore stood near the orchestra platform draped in silver silk beneath candlelight. Elegant as ever. Untouchable as ever. Yet the moment her eyes met Evelyn's across the crowded room, something cold flickered visibly behind her composure. She knew. Adrian leaned slightly closer without removing his gaze from the ballroom below. "You do not have to do this." Evelyn swallowed carefully. "Yes," she whispered. "I do." Because for the first time in her life, fear no longer belonged only to her. Amelia sat safely inside the Blackthorne family box overlooking the ballroom beside Captain Holloway and two trusted guards. Former servants waited privately in adjoining rooms prepared to testify if necessary. The documents remained secured inside Adrian's possession. Tonight was not merely social confrontation anymore. It was truth finally refusing to remain buried. Music swelled softly as they descended the staircase together. The ballroom parted instinctively around Adrian the moment he entered the crowd. Powerful men greeted him carefully. Women lowered their voices. Even politicians stepped aside. Yet Adrian's attention never drifted far from Evelyn herself. Every time tension tightened visibly through her shoulders, his hand brushed reassuringly against hers. Lady Margaret approached before either of them reached the center of the ballroom. Her smile appeared flawless beneath crystal light. "Your Grace." She inclined her head gracefully toward Adrian before turning toward Evelyn. "Darling, London has been so worried after your unfortunate emotional difficulties this week." The words struck exactly as intended. Nearby conversations quieted instantly. Evelyn felt it happen around them. The listening. The judgment. Lady Margaret continued smoothly. "Several dear friends feared the strain of marriage had overwhelmed your nerves." Adrian's entire posture went still beside her. Dangerously still. Yet before he could speak, Evelyn lifted her gaze calmly toward her mother. "That is strange," she said quietly, "because most people become emotional only after discovering their mothers attempted to institutionalize them as children." Silence crashed through the ballroom. Complete. Absolute. Several women visibly stiffened behind jeweled fans. A champagne glass slipped from someone's hand near the orchestra. Lady Margaret's expression froze for one fraction of a second before recovering smoothly. "Evelyn, darling, you were confused again." No, her voice remained steady despite her pulse thundering violently beneath her ribs. "I was confused when I believed fear meant weakness." Adrian turned toward her slightly then. Pride flickered briefly across his expression before disappearing beneath cold restraint. Lady Margaret laughed softly. "Your Grace, you see how imaginative grief can become." Adrian's eyes moved toward her at last. Gray. Glacial. "You should stop speaking now." The quietness in his voice unsettled the entire ballroom more effectively than shouting ever could. Lady Margaret lifted her chin. "I beg your pardon?" Adrian reached calmly inside his coat and withdrew several folded documents. The movement alone caused nearby guests to step closer unconsciously. Society smelled blood now. You informed London physicians that your daughter suffered emotional instability beginning at age 14. He unfolded the first paper carefully beneath the chandeliers. Interesting diagnosis considering these records describe physical injuries severe enough to require medical treatment. The ballroom erupted into shocked whispers instantly. Evelyn saw color drain slowly from several aristocratic faces nearby. Lady Margaret's composure cracked visibly for the first time. Those records are private. No, Adrian's voice sharpened slightly. They became evidence the moment a child required treatment after your discipline fractured her rib. Silence detonated through the room. Lady Margaret actually stepped backward. That is a lie. Adrian handed the document directly toward Lord Ashbourne standing nearby. Read it yourself. The older nobleman accepted the paper with trembling fingers. His eyes widened almost immediately. Around them, whispers spread like wildfire now. Fractured rib. 14 years old. Dear God. Lady Margaret turned sharply toward Evelyn. How dare you expose private family matters publicly? Something inside Evelyn finally hardened completely then. Years of fear collapsing into exhaustion. You exposed them first, she said quietly. Every time you called me unstable instead of injured. The ballroom went utterly silent again. Adrian reached for another document. Perhaps this will clarify matters further. He unfolded the treatment facility authorization beneath the chandeliers while dozens of aristocrats watched in horrified fascination. Lady Margaret Whitmore attempted to arrange indefinite institutional confinement for her grieving 14-year-old daughter after public crying episodes following her father's death. Gasps moved visibly through the crowd now. One older woman near the orchestra covered her mouth in horror. Lady Margaret's face had gone completely pale beneath her powder. You manipulated those papers. Adrian's restraint finally cracked slightly. Fury sharpened every word. You tried to bury a child alive inside medical walls because grief inconvenienced you socially. The ballroom froze. Even the orchestra had stopped playing entirely. Evelyn could barely breathe beneath the crushing weight of silence surrounding them. Yet Adrian continued calmly, relentlessly. You dismissed servants for showing kindness toward your daughter. Another paper unfolded beneath his gloved hands. You bribed physicians to support false narratives of emotional instability. Another. And you threatened witnesses into silence for nearly a decade. Lady Margaret looked around the ballroom desperately now, searching for allies, sympathy, control. None came, because the documents existed, the witnesses existed, and Adrian Blackthorne had chosen the most public room in London to destroy every lie she built around Evelyn. This is absurd, Lady Margaret whispered. Evelyn was difficult, emotional. She frightened people. A sharp voice interrupted from above the ballroom. No, you frightened people. Every head turned upward instantly. Amelia stood at the balcony railing overlooking the ballroom below, pale but steady beneath the candlelight. Beside her stood Mrs. Aldridge and two former Whitmore servants. Lady Margaret stared upward in visible shock. Amelia, her younger daughter, descended the staircase slowly while the ballroom watched in complete silence. You told me Evelyn was dangerous because you needed someone else to fear her too. Tears shimmered in Amelia's eyes, but her voice never wavered. You lied to all of us. Lady Margaret's composure finally shattered completely. You ungrateful child. The viciousness in her tone echoed sharply through the ballroom. Several guests visibly recoiled. Amelia flinched instinctively. Adrian noticed immediately. Fury darkened his expression instantly. There, he said quietly toward the surrounding crowd. Did you see it? Silence swallowed the ballroom. Adrian stepped protectively beside Evelyn while his gaze swept across London society itself. The fear response, the conditioning, the instinct to brace before she even raises her voice fully. Every word landed like judgment. That is what years of emotional abuse creates. No one spoke. No one moved. Because suddenly everyone could see it now. Evelyn's careful posture, Amelia's instinctive fear, the impossible tension surrounding Lady Margaret beneath all her elegance. The truth had been standing in front of them for years, hidden beneath silk and manners and social prestige. Adrian looked toward the crowd again. No child should survive what Evelyn Whitmore survived. The room fell absolutely silent. Not scandalized silence anymore. Horrified silence. Lady Margaret looked suddenly smaller standing alone beneath the chandeliers. Not powerful. Not untouchable. Simply exposed. Lord Ashbourne folded the medical document slowly in trembling hands. Good God! Another aristocratic woman whispered tearfully, "That poor girl." Evelyn heard it. Poor girl. Not unstable. Not emotional. Not difficult. Believed. After all these years, finally believed. Tears burned sharply behind her eyes. She tried to look away before the ballroom noticed. Adrian noticed anyway. Of course he did. His hand closed gently around hers beneath hundreds of watching eyes. Steady. Protective. Chosen publicly once again. Lady Margaret stared at them both with something close to hatred twisting across her face now. "You think society will forgive this spectacle?" Adrian's expression turned impossibly cold. "Society is not the authority that concerns you anymore." Fear flickered visibly across her face at last. Real fear, because she finally understood. This had moved beyond whispers and family reputation. Physicians had falsified records. Financial crimes existed. Witness intimidation existed. And the Duke of Blackthorne intended to pursue all of it relentlessly. Lady Margaret looked toward Evelyn one final time. "After everything I sacrificed for this family," Evelyn interrupted softly, "love does not leave children afraid to breathe." Silence swept through the ballroom one last time. Then slowly, almost imperceptibly, people began stepping away from Lady Margaret Whitmore. One by one, conversations shifted. Invitations vanished behind careful expressions. Aristocratic women who once admired her now avoided her gaze entirely. Social death unfolding in real time beneath crystal chandeliers. Evelyn watched it happen with strange numbness. She expected triumph, perhaps. Revenge. Instead, she felt only grief for the child who endured so much before anyone finally listened. Adrian's hand tightened gently around hers as though sensing the thought itself. "Come," he murmured quietly. And for the first time in her life, Evelyn walked away from her mother without fear following behind her. Spring arrived quietly over Blackthorne Manor. Snow melted from the gardens in slow silver streams beneath warming sunlight while white roses climbed once more across the eastern walls of the estate. London moved forward exactly as London always did. Scandal transformed into whispers. Whispers transformed into cautionary stories repeated behind fans at afternoon teas and ballroom receptions. Lady Margaret Whitmore disappeared from society within 3 weeks of the Ashbourne Assembly. Several investigations regarding falsified medical records and estate fraud continued privately among lawyers and magistrates. No one defended her publicly anymore. Not after the witnesses came forward. Not after the documents. Not after the Duke of Blackthorne stood beneath crystal chandeliers and forced London to confront what it had ignored for years. Evelyn expected victory to feel louder somehow. Instead, healing arrived quietly, in fragments. The first morning she walked through Blackthorne Manor without listening for angry footsteps behind her. The first evening she laughed openly at something Amelia said during supper and did not apologize afterward. The first night she slept without waking from fear. Those moments mattered more than scandal ever could. One warm afternoon in April, Evelyn sat inside the manor conservatory arranging fresh lilies into crystal vases while sunlight spilled gold across the marble floor. Amelia rested nearby reading correspondence from a charitable academy in Bath where she planned to begin teaching music that summer. Color had finally returned to her face over the past weeks. Safety suited her. "Mrs. Aldridge wrote again this morning," Amelia said softly without looking up from the letter in her lap. "She says 3 former servants have accepted positions at the Northern Estate." Evelyn smiled faintly. "Good." Amelia lowered the letter carefully. "You know, The staff still looks terrified whenever Adrian enters a room. The warmth rising immediately into Evelyn's cheeks deeply annoyed her. "Your Grace," she corrected automatically. Amelia grinned openly now. "You only use his title when you are embarrassed." Evelyn reached for another flower simply to avoid answering. The conservatory doors opened moments later before Amelia could continue tormenting her further. Adrian entered carrying several estate documents beneath one arm, while afternoon sunlight framed him sharply against the doorway. Even now, months later, Evelyn still felt the strange shift inside her chest whenever he appeared unexpectedly. Not fear anymore. Never fear. Something warmer. More dangerous. Adrian's gaze found her immediately. It always did. "You are hiding from paperwork again," Amelia announced cheerfully before either of them could speak. Adrian looked entirely unrepentant. "I delegated paperwork years ago. You intimidated people into accepting it," Amelia corrected. "That is not delegation." A rare flicker of amusement touched Adrian's expression. "I see Blackthorne Manor has become hostile territory." Amelia laughed softly before gathering her letters and rising from the chair. "I am going riding before dinner." She paused beside Evelyn long enough to squeeze her shoulder affectionately. "Try not to spend the entire afternoon pretending you do not adore your husband." Amelia. Her younger sister escaped the conservatory before Evelyn could respond further. Silence settled warmly afterward. Adrian crossed slowly toward the table where lilies rested half-arranged beneath the sunlight. "Your sister grows bolder. Living without fear tends to encourage honesty." The words escaped quietly before Evelyn fully realized their weight. Adrian's expression softened almost imperceptibly. He set the documents aside beside the window. "And you?" Evelyn looked down at the flowers in her hands. "I think I am still learning what living without fear feels like." Silence followed. Not uncomfortable, simply thoughtful. Adrian rested one hand lightly against the edge of the table beside her. "You no longer apologize every time someone enters a room." Evelyn blinked softly. "I did not realize." "I did." Warmth spread quietly through her chest. Sometimes she still forgot how closely he noticed everything about her. The realization no longer frightened her. "Adrian." His eyes lifted immediately at the sound of his name spoken so softly. Evelyn rarely used it aloud, perhaps because it always felt too intimate once she did. "Yes." She hesitated briefly before asking, "Why did you truly marry me?" Surprise flickered across his face for the first time in weeks. "You are asking now?" Perhaps I finally wanted an honest answer. Adrian studied her quietly across the flowers and sunlight. Then he reached toward one of the white lilies resting near her hand. "At first." His fingers turned the delicate stem thoughtfully. "Because I thought you looked like someone surviving a war no one else could see." Emotion tightened unexpectedly inside her chest. Adrian continued softly. "Then I became angry. Angry at how carefully you tried making yourself smaller so no one would punish you for existing." His jaw tightened faintly at the memory. "And eventually I realized I no longer entered rooms thinking first about politics or business or negotiations." Gray eyes lifted steadily toward hers. "I thought about whether you seemed tired that day." Evelyn's breath caught softly. The conservatory suddenly felt too warm beneath spring sunlight. "That is a very strange form of affection." "Yes." A faint smile touched his mouth. "Unfortunately, I appear to possess it quite severely." She laughed before she could stop herself. Real laughter this time. Unafraid. Adrian's expression changed instantly at the sound. Softer than she had ever seen it before. The sight stole her breath far more effectively than his reputation ever had. "There it is again," he murmured quietly. "What?" "The version of you untouched by fear." Emotion rose suddenly and painfully through Evelyn's chest. Because she realized something then. Adrian had never fallen in love with the frightened girl forced into his life by circumstance. He loved the woman hidden beneath years of survival. The woman she herself was only beginning to meet. Evening settled gently over Blackthorne Manor hours later. Candlelight glowed warmly through tall windows while music drifted softly from the west ballroom, where a small spring gathering filled the estate with quiet conversation and laughter. Nothing grand tonight, only close friends and trusted company. Amelia danced near the orchestra with one of Captain Holloway's younger officers, while Mrs. Aldridge sat smiling beside the fireplace wrapped in deep blue silk provided personally by Evelyn herself. Safety changed people. It softened them back into humanity. Evelyn stood near the ballroom entrance wearing pale silver beneath crystal light while guests greeted her warmly throughout the evening. Not with pity anymore. Respect. Admiration even. Women once distant now spoke gently to her. Men addressed her carefully. Society had finally learned the truth. Yet the greatest change was simpler than all of that. Evelyn no longer felt invisible inside crowded rooms. She belonged here now. Not because she married a powerful duke. Because she finally understood her own worth existed beyond fear. Across the ballroom, Adrian stood speaking with several politicians near the orchestra. Even among powerful men, he remained unmistakable. Controlled. Severe. Commanding without effort. Yet the moment his eyes found Evelyn across the crowded room, the rest of the ballroom seemed to disappear from his attention entirely. The politicians eventually noticed and wisely excused themselves. Adrian crossed the ballroom toward her through candlelight and music while conversations softened instinctively around him. He stopped directly before her beneath the enormous crystal chandelier. "You look overwhelmed," he observed quietly. Evelyn smiled faintly. "That is because half the women here spent years pretending I barely existed. And now," she glanced around the ballroom slowly, "now they look at me differently." Adrian's gaze never left her face. As they should. The simplicity of the statement tightened something warm inside her chest. Music swelled softly nearby as couples moved gracefully across polished floors. Adrian extended one gloved hand toward her. "Dance with me." Evelyn hesitated only long enough to place her hand in his. Warmth closed gently around her fingers. Steady. Familiar now. Safe. The ballroom parted naturally as the Duke led his Duchess onto the dance floor beneath hundreds of watching eyes. Months ago, such attention would have terrified her. Tonight she merely lifted her gaze toward Adrian, while music surrounded them softly. "Everyone is staring," she murmured. "Let them." His hand settled carefully at her waist as they began moving through the waltz. Controlled. Elegant. Effortlessly in sync. Evelyn realized suddenly that she was no longer bracing for judgment from the room around her. No longer calculating danger in every glance or whisper. Because Adrian looked at her like she deserved to exist fully exactly as she was. Halfway through the dance, she noticed Amelia watching from near the orchestra with suspiciously emotional eyes. Mrs. Aldridge dabbed discreetly at tears beside her. Even Captain Holloway appeared deeply invested in pretending not to witness any of it. Evelyn laughed softly beneath her breath. Adrian looked down at her immediately. "What? I think we have become entertainment. That was inevitable the moment I married a woman incapable of subtlety." She stared at him in mock offense. "I am perfectly subtle. Evelyn." The warmth hidden beneath his voice made her heart stumble slightly. Music drifted around them beneath crystal chandeliers, while candlelight reflected softly against polished marble and silver silk. For one suspended moment, the ballroom blurred into distant noise. There was only Adrian's hand steady against hers. Adrian's eyes fixed entirely upon her. Safety. Choice. Love built slowly and carefully rather than demanded through fear. "You know," he said quietly, "the first time I saw you, you looked at every doorway in the room before sitting down." Emotion caught softly in her throat. "I remember." His thumb brushed gently against her gloved hand. Barely there. Intimate enough to steal her breath anyway. "Tonight you have not looked toward a single exit." Tears threatened unexpectedly behind her eyes again. Not from pain this time. From the overwhelming realization of how far she had come. Adrian noticed immediately. Of course he did. "Evelyn." She shook her head softly. "No, it is only—" Her voice faltered briefly before she forced herself to continue. I spent so many years believing survival was the same thing as living. Silence settled gently between them despite the music surrounding the ballroom. Adrian's expression softened with devastating tenderness. And now, Evelyn looked around the ballroom once more. Amelia smiling freely near the orchestra. Trusted friends laughing near the firelight. The enormous room no longer feeling dangerous around her. Then she looked back at the man who had seen the truth before she herself could name it. Now, she whispered softly, I think I finally understand the difference. The music carried them slowly beneath crystal light while the ballroom watched quietly around them. Once, Evelyn Whitmore had stood alone at the edges of crowded rooms praying not to be noticed. Now every eye followed her across the dance floor beside the most powerful duke in England. Not because she had been rescued like some fragile thing. Because someone finally looked at her and saw exactly who she had always been beneath the fear. And Adrian Blackthorne never once let go of her hand.